Yes. Okay, that works. So we will get started. All right, everybody, welcome to the Town Hall. This is the Town Council meeting 13-25. It's Tuesday, June 24th, 2025. Probably the hottest council meeting of all time. It is 6 p.m. and we will now rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, our second item is roll call. Councillor Egan.
Here.
Councillor Pillsbury.
Present.
Councillor Pilch.
Here.
Councillor Brown.
Here.
Councillor Smith.
Present.
Councillor Benoit is here and present, and Councillor Lawrence will be here shortly. And now for our announcements. So we are accepting applications for a vacancy on the RSU 5 Board of Directors. This position will fill the vacancy until the November 4th municipal election. The clerk's office is asking for book donations to keep the book nook at Town Hall operating. We have a Leave a Book, Take a Book alcove near the main entrance. The electric tool lending library is open. Freeport residents 18 and over can borrow a variety of electric yard care tools free of charge for their personal residential use. Tools available include mowers, leaf blowers, and weed whackers. Residents must have a current Freeport Community Library card to borrow tools. Learn all about this new service and reserve items at freeportmaine.com. The town of Freeport has been unable to find suitable locations for the safe launching and viewing of fireworks on July 4th, 2025. There will not be fireworks on the 4th of July in Freeport this year. We hope to hear from residents as we continue to work with various community partners to explore the possible return of 4th of July fireworks in 2026. The draft 2025 comprehensive plan is now available for review, and your feedback is important. Use the Google form at futurefreeport.com to share your comments by July 1st on different sections of the plan, including housing, land use, transportation, economic development, and more. Printed copies are available for viewing at Town Hall and the Community Library. The plan is currently being reviewed by the state. I think it's has been completed by the state. The review's been completed by the state. And we will expect the Planning Board and Town Council to have final public hearings in late summer, early fall. All right, that's it for me. Any announcements from the rest of council? All right, moving on to information exchange. This is the part in the agenda where councilors can provide updates on committee meetings, conversations with constituents, any other important information to share. Councilor Smith.
Just a couple things. First of all, leadership met yesterday, and we started talking about district meetings for the fall, and we have some ideas about how we could, at the same time, collect topics that we think would be of general interest to all districts, as well as giving district councilors an opportunity to customize those for issues related to specific districts. But the thought was to have the Special Projects Committee meet sometime in August to think through what that sort of general structural proposal might be. And then that would come to the first council meeting in September, which would be just a few days ahead of those district meetings that'll go through September. So I think Chris is going to work on getting a special projects committee meeting together for that. Another note, I had an email from a constituent related to the CSX Railroad maintenance. Many of us have noticed the piles of ties being staged at various crossings. For the most part, people who live near a railroad crossing have two ways to go to get to where they need to go on either side of the railroad. There are just a handful of neighborhoods in Freeport that do not, that are essentially cut off if that railroad crossing is not passable. There's one in my district on the Fernald Road. I think there's another one at the end of Sequoia Drive, which I think is in Matt's district. But I've talked with Sophie so that we can get a handle on trying to dial in the exact detailed schedule of those particularly sensitive crossings, so we could be aware of that, not only communicating that to residents, but also to public safety so that they can keep that in mind.
Great. Councillor Egan.
Yeah, I just want to highlight, we have some visitors with us this evening from Liberty Graphics, which is a new business that has moved into downtown Freeport. This is a well-established, well-known, well-regarded, well-hugged business that creates some really fun designs on all kinds of things, primarily clothing. And I want to introduce them for folks to get to know them. They have already, in just a few short months, found ways to connect with organizations, arts organizations, service organizations in town, to establish themselves and relationships. And I think that's just exemplary behavior. So I want to just ask Scott McCormick and Will Cox to come up to the podium, just give a word or two about their decision and how it's going in your first few months here in Freeport.
Well, we appreciate the opportunity to just say a couple words. My name's Scott McCormick. This is Will Cox. And Liberty Graphics has been around since 1978. And with the Freeport store now, it's our fourth retail store. Traditionally, most of the business has been wholesale or the seconds in the outlet in Liberty Village. So it's nice that we're expanding. 4 years ago, we became an employee-owned cooperative. So it's changed a bit. And part of what John was referring to, part of our mission is to support the communities that we operate in. Not only the workers that we have, but then also those other organizations in those communities. So it's been a pleasure for us to be able to reach out. We appreciated Tawny and the Chamber doing the ribbon cutting, and today marks 1 month from our grand opening. So it's going really well. It's been super welcoming. Nick with Code Enforcement was awesome to work with. We had to build a demising wall in the store.
Could you say that into the microphone one more time? I want to make sure the recorded meeting captures that. Thank you.
But the whole town, from the different organizations and all, have been excellent. And I'll let Will talk a little bit about some of the outreach that we've been doing. But thank you.
Yeah, so we've been doing a handful of stuff so far. Made myself a little note so I wouldn't forget. We've done the T-shirts for the 5K run, which has been awesome. They turned out great. Also the Meeting House Arts. Suzanne's wearing the shirt, lovely. And we're also making the Oyster Fest T-shirts coming up, and the design looks awesome as well. We're also planning on doing like monthly sponsors in our store where Liberty Graphics will match the first 100 to really try to branch out into the community as much as possible. And that's been really successful thus far. And we're also planning on hopefully making a collaboration with Wolf's Neck. We love what they stand for, and their mission really aligns with ours. And I'm an artist, and so when we were building the store, trying to mimic the Liberty Graphics outlet store, making it really homey, farmy, the unique antique sort of vibe. We decided to make like a little mural based off of Wolf's Neck, which is awesome. And I think it turned out great, not to toot my own horn, but it definitely added a nice sort of presence to this store. But we're super excited to see the potential and see what other community outreach and collaborations we can do. Well, thank you guys.
Fantastic. Welcome. Welcome.
I will just say that I've gone several times and I've already spent good money there. So thank you for being here. I'm very excited to have you in town. So thank you.
One of the opportunities that I had to get to know these folks was through some work I do at Meeting House Arts, and I just want to ask Suzanne to explain already the connection between a small business and our arts community.
Yes, thank you. I'm both a fan and a model. I really am taken by this company and hope we can find a lot more of these types of companies to come our way. As you'll probably hear later, we are at almost capacity now, so it's kind of time to pick and choose, and let's choose these kind of folks, because I really think this is adding to our community and to our sense of who we are. They have not only sponsored Paul Sullivan concert, they are sponsoring an art gallery exhibit, our juried abstract show in September, but they also, we have now, after 2 years of trying to do this, 100 T-shirts in top quality, and we're giving them out all over the place. So thank you for welcoming them here, and let's find more.
Great. Thanks very much, guys. I'm hoping we have more opportunities to do this, and I think it's a great chance for the small businesses to come in and explain where they fit in the community and give us a chance to welcome them. So I'm hoping this kind of becomes a regular thing. Thanks. I have one quick announcement about the Ad hoc Housing Committee, which had its final regular meeting earlier this month. It's not going away. It's just going to take a pause. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on that the staff are well aware of and the Housing Committee's been updated on. So we're going to give that a chance to kind of churn through and probably reconvene the group in September and take a look and see where certain elements of our various plans and rewrites have evolved to. So they haven't gone away. Every one of the members of the committee is interested in continuing, even though the official status of the committee is sunsetted. Thanks.
Thank you, and I hope that they feel like they've been successful. I think a lot of their recommendations we are going to see move forward, so I look forward to their continued involvement as we see that happen. Any more? Councillor Pilch.
Are we going to talk recycling during the town manager's report?
Yeah.
No.
Unless you'd like to kick it off here.
I'll wait for you.
I don't think we've had a council meeting since the Village Corridor Initiative kickoff. So that was
last Tuesday.
That was last week. Time flies.
Yep.
So we had a presentation at the Freeport Performing Arts Center, which is at the high school, where Jeff Speck, who is a well-regarded urban planner around walkable, active transportation cities, he came and spoke, and I think underscored a lot of the things that we've seen and heard from the community. It was a very enthusiastic and I think refreshing kickoff, which is important to highlight. This kickoff is the next phase. It is the culmination of a lot of the planning we've seen happen over the last many years. So I think we'll see good progress.
If I could just add to the Jeff Speck, we had lots of people who came. Tom is finishing up the video with great hopes of getting it posted later this week. The one thing I would say, because we've gotten some feedback, Jeff corrected or reaffirmed some of his statements that he made at the meeting around paid parking, and at the meeting that we were at on Wednesday morning. And I just want to make sure that people, especially counselors, understand his intent was to be talking about paid on-street parking, not turning parking lots into paid parking. So I just want to clarify that because there was some confusion at the meeting.
Any other pieces of information to share? If not, we will move on to our committee update from the Freeport Economic Development Corporation.
Good evening. Mary Davis, President of Freeport Economic Development Corp., and my right-hand partner, Tawny. Last time we were here last month, we give a monthly update, and last time we talked about a lot about vacancies. This time what we want to do is highlight the sustainability and making sure that not only do we get the vacancies filled, but also that we keep that vacancy rate low over time. You know, it occurred to me, I don't know if you saw the article in the Portland Press Herald about downtown Portland and what a terrible time they're having right now. All the businesses are closing shutters, they're moving out, they're having a very difficult time. And if you listen to all these people in their interviews, actually they're about to try to embark on doing the things that we're already doing. So it makes me feel good that we're not in that kind of situation about watching everybody shut our doors anymore, but we also can't take our feet off the gas. So it's important that we're here to kind of bring you along with us. So go ahead, Tani.
Thank you, Mary. So, yeah, it's so true. I feel, I mean, here standing before you now, actually, as it did behind the dais, my heart just beats so fast because I just feel so honored to be able to do this work, not only in Freeport, but now have the privilege to get outside the gates of Freeport to try to get more folks to come and be a part of our community. Because we do have a very interesting and fantastic demographic that includes all ages, you know, very outdoor-minded, and then also we have the privilege of getting many out-of-state visitors. We've been able to sort of not just talk about that, but we've done so many demos with Placer because it's so expensive that I think they're catching on to me. But we are still capturing, you know, close to that. It's impressive that we are still capturing that famous 3 million visitors per year, which is fantastic. And a lot of that is in thanks to LL Bean and Wolf Snacks. They just pop up whenever we're out visiting other places. It shows up in Placer. It shows up when I leave the state, so thank you. Those big anchors are such a huge help to us to draw that kind of mixture that we're looking for, which is a third national, a third regional, and a third local. And that's how we can get things to support having these wonderful places like Liberty Graphics join them into the mix. And I can report from businesses, the feedback that we have right now are several of businesses are a bit ahead of where they were last year. But on the other side of things, there are businesses that are struggling. Overall, though, volume has been slightly down, but the price per transaction is slightly up, so it's kind of, you know, washing its way out. From the property owner's perspective, we're still in a creative zone right now. We are not really at a market rate rent that is really where it needs to be to sustain what the property owner needs and really what the renter needs. So we're still coming up with creative ways. I still hesitate, but we are still kind of coming up with Band-Aids. You're going to see a lot more storefronts opening now underneath this creative way of doing things, and that's really fueled by the vision that has been put forth through the downtown vision and now reinforced through Jeff Speck's work. That's what the property owners are excited by, energized by, and what separates Freeport from other towns. So it is really, we are one of the key components that I think about and why Freeport Economics is working right now is because we recognize recovery. We recognize that in many ways from the downtown vision work, the comprehensive plan, the dog bone work plan, and now the Main Street work. We recognize those things and we don't just talk about them, we initiate them and we get them to work. And with great leadership for all of you, we are seeing this happening. So it puts a vacancy in the past. That's what we're not talking about, but I am going to say something, and if I could drop this mic, I'd drop it. Because we have the lowest vacancy rate that we've had since 2013. I'm going to just say it twice since I can't drop it. The lowest vacancy rate downtown that we've had since 2013. That's incredible. That is the reason why we do this work. This is what you're seeing and why you're having local businesses come in here to tell you how excited they are to be here. It's incredible. But I do have to tell you that when I go to bed at night, I have a great responsibility about the retention. So I do want to say to you, keep implementing all of these plans that we talk about because they are what is going to keep that vacancy rate so low. So Mary, you want to talk a little bit about what we've seen?
About the vacancy rate. Go ahead and go on to the next. So the good news is the media, the coverage, the stories, the way that we have talked about this, people believe the plans that we put out because they see activity working on it. And because of that, you're seeing folks come to town like Liberty, like others, who are saying, we believe in what you're doing. So this is a pretty crazy look.
Go, Vanna.
If you look, this is tracking since 2017. But we have tracked for another about 5 years before that. We're currently at 5.15% vacancy rate in downtown. And with some of the work that we're doing, I think it will fall below 4% of a couple of the deals now that we're working on. That's an incredibly low vacancy rate. The other thing that we're seeing is, this is Lower Main Street, is the blue. In the blue, there's a couple of large properties, including the brewery that we think has another owner who's going to do something with it. And with that, again, this vacancy rate would go down. This is really good news for us. It means, however, as Suzanne said, we need to be cautious and careful about who we add from now going on. We still have about 8 more vacancies in downtown. They're pretty good size, so they kind of appeal to a larger regional or a national business, so we'll continue to look for those. But it means that we also need to make sure we're getting the people that we want here. Now, there's always going to be some turnover. That just happens with retail, and we're going to continue to watch that. But again, this is that we want to retain this low vacancy rate because this is what keeps everybody happy. This is what keeps all the retailers happy, and what keeps our taxpayers happy. It sort of keeps everyone happy. So go ahead and do the next one. And these are new businesses that have been just in June. This is since we were here last time. These are new openings.
I mean, one of them, that was yesterday.
Yeah.
That was signed yesterday. I'm just saying, and that's a very big deal to me. And the Mala building has been empty for a very, very long time. So you've got very great users coming in there. You've got sips and suds on the first floor, and what the actual fudge on the top floor. So it's a great, sort of again a creative way to fill an relatively unique building, with stairs in the middle of it. It's gorgeous.
That is kelp.
Yes.
That is your kelp.
I know Mary tried to find, Mary's like, what is the use? And I'm like, well, it's going to be, it's going to be sandwiches, but some of them are going to be like kelp burgers, kelp bombs. And I've had the privilege of trying them, and they're absolutely fantastic. And then an old fashioned, like I said, old fashioned candy store. Both of these people live in town. So it's incredible for us.
And it was a very interesting deal of Wilder really working with Tawny and the two folks to put together a deal that worked, because it's a space that's hard to share, and yet we're going to have both of them full because they were able to creatively come up with a solution to make it work. So it's super exciting. There hasn't been anyone in there for years.
And talk about years, though. If you were to say to one of our other ones, and now you guys, I have to move my office. So 42 Main Street is now leased. That's a big deal for us. That's right in the center of town. That's also going to a local user called Realms of Legends, which is not exactly everything I understand because I don't play Dungeons and Dragons, but different use, different audience, different population of people coming through town. So again, that is a property owner that's local. He worked really well with this other local, again, Freeport resident to make that deal come through. And as you can see, we won't spend other time on everyone, but I was just so excited about those top ones. So, and we are working on some other really big square footage deals that I, of course, can't share with you tonight. But my gosh, these are big, big square footage buildings that also have been empty for a very long time. And I want to tell you that it is the feedback from the vision plan is where we were trying to capture, like what the priorities were for residents. We are listening to that wholeheartedly and making that our top priority as well when we think about which vacancies are requested to be filled.
And I think, again, that's that message of we need to be choosy, so we're chasing people, not waiting for them all to come to us.
So the number one thing that I say, or I've done this thing, I never thought I would do it. I thought it was just not really in my comfort zone, but I've been doing these things called cold calls, you guys, and they work. Like if I read an article about somebody leaving an area, I'm like, well, that would be an awesome thing to have in Freeport. I call them and they actually answer the phone, and they answer the phone relatively soon. I mean, one of these users that I can't tell you about tonight, but is a very big space, and he has been here a few times now, and I actually said to him the other day, I really thought I was going to have to stalk you. Like I was so intent on getting you here that I thought I'd just have to call you every day. But he actually called me the next very second day, so I didn't have to do that day after day. But lucky him. But the number one thing that I'm saying to people is that we want you, and it's incredible how that is really impactful. And then to work with the town and your leadership and some of the things that you guys have put into place, like the Momentum Grant and the Fit Up Grant, the prospect of housing, the ordinances simplification, the different processes, the TIF, free parking, all of these things separate us from other towns because, as I told you before, when folks are coming here to look at spaces, they're not just looking at Freeport. They're looking at other other towns. And this is this is a significant welcome that we can give them. Sophie, I think back to a meeting that we had with the developers who actually said they felt like they had the red carpet rolled out for him. So that is a really incredible message that's very impactful. I also had the privilege of meeting again with Mike Marino today, who's one of our longest standing legend property owners in town. He owns what you guys would know as the Lobster Cooker and the Banana Republic, several other things. He used to own actually a significant more amount of property in town, but he still owns that. I learned so much from Mike because he teaches me over decades and decades, like 35 years of being a property owner in Freeport, what has worked, what's worked really, really well, some things that haven't, but Mike is a great leader and inspiration to me. So I wanted to make sure that you guys saw his picture tonight. Okay. All right. You want to work on this one? Or you want me to go? Okay. Okay. So working together is a unique experience, and I totally credit my overused hashtag, we're always better and stronger together, but it's so true. We have had such a wonderful time working together and pivoting as we go through things, setting businesses up for success, as I mentioned earlier. It's a great responsibility, a great privilege to work with businesses and try to bring them to Freeport. Also to help businesses that are here remain here. As I mentioned when I opened, a lot of businesses are doing extremely well, as we expect that they would in these wonderful warm months where we're very busy. Others aren't, and we're finding that, again, if we really listen to those businesses, particularly if they're struggling, things that we can do to help them with partnerships, collaborations with other business owners has been really impactful, and just a great way to see them succeed. And we're being noticed by other towns. I was invited to Bass Downtown District to talk about some of the things that we're doing here in Freeport and what sort of our magic elixirs are. And I was so proud to tell them about all the work that the town is providing to businesses as they come to town, because it's not what's replicated in other towns. Other towns aren't doing this. They've tried other forms of something that they thought would work, forgivable loan programs and so forth. Those haven't resonated with folks. But again, the FitUp grant has been huge, even for businesses that actually end up not taking advantage of the FitUp grant. When they're first coming here, the fact that you offer that and you send that message to them has been just incredible. I love working, of course, with leadership and with Brett. I feel like we, one of Mary's terms, we know what our swim lanes are, and it's just been a privilege. I can entertain somebody, get them to a space, and then I get to hand it off to Brett, and he kind of finishes everything and deals with code and all that other stuff. So it's been a fantastic partnership, and it's been a privilege to do the work.
So I think our final message is, this is great. We're so excited to have these kind of vacancy rates, but the work doesn't stop here because we also need to keep that vacancy rate low. So all the work that you're doing on things like ordinances and ease of use and all of those things that we're doing, parking that allows a lot of people to be able to be here, but also allows us to develop housing. Those are all such important things for us to continue to keep our foot on the pedal on. So we're saying, good job. Thank you. Now we can't rest. Keep going. So, thanks. Questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks, Tony. Great energy.
All right.
We were trying to not cheer.
Well, good work for sure. Okay, I think that's it for our information exchange, unless there's anything else. Okay, we'll move on to the manager's report.
So I have a few other items, but I wanted to take this time to let Carrie Kenny kind of give you guys an update on the work that they did with trail assessments. You guys received some of those trail assessments I think, embedded in a manager's report a while ago. But if she wants to come up, she could, whomever from the Conservation Trust. So as council will remember, we actually have two pieces of business with the Conservation Trust right now. The first was the trail assessment work, which we signed a little over a year ago, an agreement for that. And then you also approved an agreement with the trust to work collaboratively with the town to expend approximately $50,000 of ARPA funds on trail maintenance and improvements. So we are embarking on this process, and Carrie and I thought now was a good time to kind of give you an update on the first kind of piece of work.
So I have just a few notes, and Ryan Burke is joining me, Chair of the Freeport Conservation Commission. Ben Shepherd's here from that group, and Sarah Payne just joined Freeport Conservation Trust about a year ago. She would remind me what exactly that is, but and did all of these trail assessments, which is awesome. We reviewed 6 properties: Hedgehog, Hidden Pond, Florida Lake, Quarry Woods, Leon Gorman Park, and Soul Park. Putting all of those assessments together, the total mile, we GPSed every single trail and started so that we have it in-house and we can share it with the town, all the shape files. The total miles of trails on the 6 properties is 10.5 miles in total. I wanted to let you know that we did a review of hits on the Freeport Conservation Trust webpage, on the trail page. And within the last 18 months, Hedgehog Mountain came in first with over 3,000 webpage, 3,392 hits. Winslow Park was second with 1,850. The East Freeport Network, I gotta work on that. 1341, Florida Lake, right behind 1321, Powell Point, just over 1,000. Pettingill Farm, 998, Calderwood, 928, Bliss Woods, and it all goes down from there. So that kind of gives you an idea of who's visiting our webpage and what they're looking at right now. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. There are a million other places to go, all trails. We did a Google search this afternoon, which was totally different than everything else. Maine Trail Finder, Maine by Foot. There's all sorts of dog-specific websites on trails. There's a million of them. So trying to track and trace them all is really tough, but you can kind of go and see what's out there. The most searched sites on all trails are Hedgehog, Wolf's Neck, State Park, Florida Lake, Winslow Park, and Audubon, Mass Landing. So it depends where you go and how you do the search on what the results are, but that kind of gives you an idea. The purpose of these summaries was just to do a trail assessment of the condition of all the trails currently. So we GPSed, as I said, everything. Out of those results, improving trail communication became the top priority through increasing trail property information, both on the town and FCT website, and how those interact. To provide more detailed information to allow users to choose what best fits their abilities. We had Enoch Glidden, who does trail assessments from a wheelchair, assess several properties. That's how this all kind of started, was in a whole different way. We hired him to do 3 properties in Freeport. And what he said is, don't use moderate, easy. That means different things to different people. Really give detailed information and let people decide. Grade, soils, conditions, so that they can decide for themselves. Don't judge for them. So we have tried collecting consistently across all the properties that information. We have started meeting with Peter. Last name?
Pete Yazakavich.
Yes, to look at how to share and link the trail details between FCT and the town. So that's already started, and we're already working on building that. One of the other consistencies was install consistent updated trail maps at trailheads and online, standardize information across properties, upgrade signage, maps, wayfinding system-wide, balance ongoing capital improvements with routine maintenance. Invasives is always a topic of discussion, you can't help it. And address any identified wet trail sections with bog bridges or turnpiking or water bars or something. So I would also let you know that FCT did the first trail survey last year. Nearly half of the respondents expressed interest in using trails if they were made more accessible. Many respondents asked for improved signage and parking, with 50% requesting better on-trail signage and just under 50% suggesting clear information about trail difficulty and distance. And I would tell you, I live in North Yarmouth, but I was shocked to come to Freeport. You might see a trail that's 0.5 and you think I'll run out there for lunch, but it has about 16 gullies in it. This area is amazing on the amount of gullies and hills that is all over town. It's astounding and spectacular. So that's great. So this is the Hedgehog Trail Assessment. What's good about these is we can update them once a year. If there's been a capital improvement, it should make it in here and be documented and saved. And so this is a working document, a live document that can be changed easily. We have just finished the Pettingill Farm. We just did one for Pettingill Farm, working with the Historical Society. And we hopefully will finish soon the East Freeport network of trails from Calderwood to Ringrose, which is over 500 acres with 3 different entrances, and we're adding more acres this year. So that's kind of I would say, the synopsis of what we're trying to accomplish. Just trying to see what condition the town trails are in, and also what the FCT trails are in.
I'll add a little bit more. I think, is our budget discussion tonight? This is not a pitch, but it's no, I just want to say 10.5 miles, 500 acres. I didn't do the math. I did it while I was sitting there. It's a lot. And we're going to take these assessments, which we're thankful to the town for, having Carrie and her teams do that. There's a lot that we can do on there. Some of the information, the maps, we're working on those. The blazes, pretty simple stuff that we can do. But then also there are capital improvements such as parking and things of that nature that, we do need cooperation and help from the town. So we're so thankful for the assessments. It gives us a kind of a launching point where we need to go and what we need to do. Accessibility is a huge one that people want, and the improvements. So there's a lot of work to be done, but, this is a good point to start. And we love the FCT and Carrie.
I would also say, I would also add that accessibility did rise to the top of our survey. And I'm not quite ready to announce, but the first one for FCT will probably be at Calderwood. That's where Enoch Glidden went to do his assessment. He said it's perfect. And I think he's right. So that could be forthcoming maybe this summer. So I will keep you informed on that. And the parking lot is in there, so we put that in December, so.
So the collaboration between the Conservation Commission and FCT is really a wonderful thing to watch from afar. The amount of work that gets done is truly incredible, and it's nice to see their efforts, council resources through ARPA and the $27,000 increase in this year's budget towards trails, really kind of come together to meet the voices that we've heard in the community really wanting to improve our trails and outdoor activities. So I'm so happy that we have a really capable group of people that can take that message from council and begin to make it a reality. So.
Any questions at all, or?
I'll put in my annual plug. It's nice to hear that Florida Lake actually is getting credibility here on the list of hits for visits.
Great wording.
My dog Josie and I go there several times a week. I only live less than a half a mile away. Yeah. Surprisingly, I don't ever run into crowds, so that's good. I'm going at the right time, I guess. But I've had a number of folks for several years now ask about when we can get an accessible entrance from the parking lot to the lake. Just that would be an enormous advantage for people that need a little bit of extra assistance to get around in the woods, to be able to at least get to enjoy the view of that lake. I don't think we have to, at this point, plan for an accessible trail all 2.7 around it, but just getting from the parking lot out to the lake would be a fantastic accomplishment, and I really hope that we can get that onto a capital improvement plan soon.
And I will share with you, that was one of the places Enoch went to. So I can share his report with you all.
Great.
This is maybe a naive question, but could this help inform any sort of access to trail bond
Yes.
funds?
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
Great.
Yeah. Definitely.
So I don't want to take a lot of time, but I do have a few things I think council wants to hear.
Are you all set with them?
Oh, you guys all set?
Thank you very much.
All right. Our communications team has reached out to CXX to try to get a more formalized plan. We haven't heard anything. They'll ping them again before the end of the week. Chris also reached out to the Buston's overseers about our trip out there. We haven't heard back yet, but we haven't. That just happened earlier this week. I want to thank.
I'll note last year we actually asked if they wanted
Yes,
to come here. So just as long as that's in the conversation.
It
somewhere.
is.
Great.
It is. On the, I want to just extend appreciation to the Public Works crew, specifically Jonathan Hand and Shane Giroux and Ben Wagner. They did an incredible job this year finishing up all the hand paint work. There was a lot of it, and it featured heavily in the Jeff Speck presentation, which was pretty cool. Also want to recognize that the police department was out in force today during peak heat, working to locate a missing person. It was great. We learned late this afternoon that that person's been located and they're safe and sound, but that was truly a big effort. Give you a heads up that on Thursday, folks will see a lot of activity at the Public Safety Building as Freeport Fire Rescue hosts a celebration of life for our longtime medical director, Dr. Kendall, who passed away unexpectedly earlier this month. I bring it to your attention because you're going to see ceremonial color guards, and Life Flight, which he was an executive director for, is going to be pausing to do their ceremonial recognition, which will look like they're hovering over the Public Safety Building. But 5:30 on Friday, there isn't an emergency. It's just respecting somebody who gave a really long life of public service. LD 1829 was signed by Governor Mills earlier this week. It reminds me a lot of LD 2003, where they've stepped in for communities that don't appear to be moving fast enough and forward-thinking enough with affordable housing. We are right now trying to figure out how those changes are going to dovetail with the elements that we have already kind of agreed we want to move forward with in ordinance language. We have a year to implement these changes, which sounds like a long time, but in this environment, a year is not a lot of time to implement ordinance change. To give you an example of what I mean by trying to figure out how it will dovetail, we're going to be talking about increasing the height limits for buildings in the downtown district. There is language in the new bill that would require an additional allowance of 14 feet for affordable housing units. We're trying to figure out if there are limitations. So when we talk about how much height we're okay with, are we creating an unintended consequence? So we're kind of trying to work through that. My hope is that we'll have Kyle in to talk with council once he can digest how that bill will impact Freeport, so you'll just understand what the changes will be. I met this morning with, actually Brett and I met this morning with the New England Passenger Rail Authority. This is news for council leadership. They're going to be here next week in other business to talk to you about development initiatives that they have in progress that are critical to us meeting our goals around transit-oriented development that they're running into some challenges with. And I think they want to talk to council about whether or not council can support the elements of those projects that would help us move our goals forward. So just want to give you a heads up, they will be here. And finally, last but definitely not least, staff worked really hard to get things done, and we put up signs for the silver bullets that, based on recollection, that say on both silver bullet locations, these are going to go away on August 28th. And we were very efficient, but maybe not as effective as we should have been. I am really kind of concerned in general about where we are with this discussion, because I sent off a, oops, did I make a mistake? And I got back 3 very different interpretations about what our conversation yielded. So I think that a couple of things, I went back and reviewed, and I think staff has a little bit more work to do on a companion sign with the current sign that talks a little bit more about why the decision was made. There is confusion, I think, even among council as to whether both silver bullets were going to get pulled or one silver bullet was going to get pulled. There is concern raised by at least one member of the community that this should have been more widely noticed and discussed. My proposal, I've stopped everything. I stopped until tonight. So everything is as it was on Wednesday night with a sign in the ground and nothing more. I have a time schedule with communications to start working on the other aspect. But I wonder if we should schedule some time next week in other business. It's a relatively light agenda otherwise, to go back through this discussion and have a very clear outcome that everybody understands and agrees, well, a majority agrees with. That's my proposal, but it's your decision.
Sounds like a plan.
Yeah, I do think it's important we talk about it and that we're clear in what we decide or consent to. And I think it's really important to convey the why in addition to the what. So a sign is a good start, but I think we have a lot more work to do.
Yeah.
So it's a complicated discussion. We're doing this because we feel it's fiscally responsible. It's also better for the environment, not worse for the environment. But there's a lot to it, so we need to discuss it in public, but also have some outreach around it.
Yeah, and I think some clarity on trial versus permanent, I think is important. I know what I think, but we can talk more about that next week. And I know last time we talked about this and we spoke about it, also education is very important, the why, what you're saying, Dan, and I think FSAB is well suited to support the environmental component of that, of why it's not only financially irresponsible and will continue to cost more money to taxpayers, but also environmentally, the issues.
So I am joining Caroline at the FSAB meeting this week to kind of start that conversation. I know John had his hand raised.
Well, I think it's fine that we talk about it next week. I thought we had concluded the decision. The fact pattern that we talked about is not new. These are facts and figures and implications of cost that we've known for quite a while. And I'm not sure why we would continue to delay a decision when the numbers are pretty compelling, but that's great to have a conversation so we're all clear on that. And I totally agree with Councilor Pilch that putting some explanation about the context of where the decision is coming from is critical for public consumption of the decision.
And I think, too, there's a separation. I know we talked about that. They can come back if this ends up being a horrible decision. I think that's very different than a trial. I just want to say that, too.
I just want to acknowledge, I think part of the confusion comes from the fact that I brought this subject up in as a budget, part of the budget conversation, because Earl was in front of us with the Public Works budget, and I thought it was important to have that if it meant we might be able to alter the Public Works budget. What we did, I think, come to the conclusion was that we did want to make this change, but that it was not going to immediately impact the budget because we needed to see how things shook out. So I think we left that conversation, some of us with different opinions about what we'd actually decided aside from the budget. So I think it's perfectly fine next week to just lay it all out again and make a decision.
So what,
clearly.
My question for you, Sophie, is what do you need next week that you don't feel like you can get in this moment right now?
So I think one of the things, we have a long agenda tonight.
Yes.
So that was part of what we didn't put this on the agenda. I think, I know this council is very responsive to concerns about transparency and engagement. So I just want to make sure I check that box for people. I think it would be good if I had another week with communication staff to bring back some messaging and also bring back some of Rod's numbers that compelled council. So if we put together a little slide deck that could then be clipped and put on the website, I think would be good. I also think there are people on council that have very diverse perspectives, and it's always good in a messaging campaign to get some of those. So that's what I think would be different.
Okay, any other thoughts? All right, I look forward to that discussion at our next meeting. I'm going back in time because I forgot item 3. So I'm going to go back to the item 3, which is to waive reading and accept as printed the June 3rd, 2025 minutes.
So moved.
Oh, and June 10th.
And June 10th, 2025.
Second.
Great. All in favor? Aye. Okay. All right, so we'll move on to our first public comment period. This is for folks who are here in attendance. It is for items that are not on the agenda. I just ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. Anybody interested in speaking? I'm not sure if Chalmers is or not.
Well, we'll see if he comes back in through the other door.
See what happens.
I would.
Nope, okay. Moving on. All right, moving on to our new business part of the agenda. So this is the consent agenda, item 74-25. So I'll read it. Be it ordered that the June 24th, 2025 consent agenda be adopted.
Second.
All right, the only thing, a very small one this time, it's for liquor license renewal at Freeport Oyster Bar and donations to the library. All right, all in favor? Aye. All right, moving on to item 75-25. So this is a public hearing for proposed amendments to Chapter 11 Building Code Ordinance to update code references into the recently adopted state code and to consider the repealing or retaining of the optional stretch energy code. You can see there are 2 be it ordains here. To kind of recap what we're doing here, the first one is updating the dates to align with the state references to the dates to align with the most up-to-date code. The second one is about the consideration of repealing the stretch code. We'll start with the first one. We'll move to the second.
Nope, you're going to start.
I'm going to start with a public hearing. Thank you.
There you go.
So I'll go ahead and open the public hearing on both items.
This is the time the public would speak on either of those two issues.
Yes. So this will be speaking on the references, the code references, and also the stretch code. Take it away.
Andrew Arsenault, Route 1. I'm here to speak against the stretch code. I think the basic insulation values, the new construction stuff that we're doing now is fine. I think I'm saying the right thing. I don't want the stretch code. I don't want the added insulation and all that rigmarole that we have to go through. I was looking on my phone the other day, reading through some stuff from news and stuff, and they were talking about the cost of building new businesses, building new homes. How people, even through the West, are talking about opening up public lands in certain places next to bigger developments because we just can't get enough houses built for the people we need. And the cost of that, people, different talk show people talking about, even their kids are having a hard time trying to, get into a new house. And when you add a value on top of that and the cost of borrowing money and all the other things that are going along with it, I think we need to pause with this stretch code for now. New houses are so much better than they were when we built in the 80s. It's unbelievable how much better they are. The windows are better, the doors are better, the insulation's thicker, and I think we can survive with the way it is for a while. So my vote is not to add the stretch code, not to add any more regulation on. So I still think houses are much better built than when we pounded them together back in the 80s. So we've come a long ways. I think we ought to pause and allow people to, I know if somebody comes in and builds a new low-income housing, they're going to do all that stuff anyways, because they're going to want to keep their heating costs down. But for the average Joe, I know there's not many people pounding their own house together like we used to in the old days, but still there might be somebody that wants to do it, and it might make a difference to make or break the deal. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Bob Stevens, 50 Moose Crossing, here to speak in favor of updating the code references and to speak in favor of repealing the ordinance that adopted the stretch energy code. I think what the council did for the town that the town wanted, which was move ahead from the 2015 to 2021, and that added many improvements that will help make the buildings in town very energy efficient. There was sufficient time to know what the cost would be relative to the value of those improvements, of making tighter houses more energy efficient. There has not been sufficient time to decide and look at the history of what the new stretch code effect would be relative to the cost of those items versus the benefit, and how long of a period of time they would take to pay back them and make it a worthwhile adoption. So I think we've got a great code now. The state is caught up with what Freeport has led on. We could always look at facts in the future and say, hey, look, we've enough experience here. We ought to go back and take a look at it, but not now. We ought to go back and go with what people wanted and you adopted, and repeal the stretch code that would be attached to this 21 code. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Hi, my name's Dan Winship, speaking against the stretch code. My father built a house 30 years ago, okay? 2x6 walls. Nothing real special for insulation. It was decent stuff. He uses 200 gallons of oil a year, and that's with heating his water. That's with no stretch code. So, I mean, to really make people do this, which isn't a safety concern, I think is excessive. Because houses can be built, because nobody builds 2x4 walls anymore. That's just non-existent, And as your inspector said on the screen here once, the houses that passed were $1 million homes. Now, I'm sorry, but I ain't got $1 million. Neither do my kids. So, thank you.
Thank you.
I would ask Nick. the stretch code that we were used to before in 2021 code that we're adopting.
Sure. So Nick, could you perhaps explain the difference between the code that we are coming from and the code that we're adopting now?
On the regular building codes and everything, or just the energy code?
Just energy.
Just the energy. So currently, right now, we are on the 2021 energy stretch code, which takes the 2021 code and the new amendments from the state board. Says on residential projects, which is 1 and 2 families or multifamily, you have to do what's called a res check, which is a program from the Department of Energy, and you input all the information, and you have to be 15% better than what everybody else in the state is. If you do all electric, you'd have to be 10. If we repealed it, then we would just go back to just the 2021 with some amendments that the state board made to, like, I don't remember them all off the top of my head, but say there's 20 amendments to the 2021 to reflect certain things that the state board, which is what the rest of the state is on, other than currently Freeport, South Portland, and Portland. I've only had one house since it's been adopted that's complied since April 7th. Everybody else, I think, is holding off at this point.
All right. The public hearing is still open if anyone else would like to speak. I don't think we have anybody online.
Nope, just the media.
Can we ask Nick to explain what these additional things do, how that test works or something? I mean, so we'd sort of, the people at home would sort of know, because I don't understand what the res test is, and he's...
Sure.
Yep. It's not a test. It's a, before you apply for your building permit, when you're applying for your application to my office, you normally would just provide us with plans, and you'd call out, R20 in the wall with an R5 continuous, an R60 in your ceiling, an R15 on your basement walls, or whatever you were going to do, and then explain my HVAC is going to be heat pumps or whatever it's going to be. You just explain it to me. Now, if we go with the stretch code, and you could do it that way before April 7th, or you could do what's called a res check. A res check is this program that's online that basically the Department of Energy creates, and you go in and you type in, you have a 1,500 square foot house with, call it 3,000 linear feet of walls with this amount of continuous installation, this amount of cavity insulation, and you do the same thing for your types of windows and doors, then you do the same for your basement walls, you do the same thing for your ceiling, you do the same thing for your roofs, and then you go down through probably, now it's probably close to 100 questions, and you answer, is everything in the thermal, is all your HVAC in this area, or do you have a sunroom, then add this. And it basically is a computer model that it's called the alternative method to just doing a prescriptive of calling out what you want to do in your walls. So it basically does the science behind it and then says if you comply with the 21 or if you exceed it and how much you exceed it. But it's basically you have to do all the programming, the information yourself, and then you just submit the report to my office. So instead of just calling it out or writing out what you're doing, you have to actually print out the report. It comes, the actual report's probably 20-something pages long.
But at the end of the day, I'm going to simplify because codes can be really confusing, right? We had, prior to the state's adoption of the new energy code and the stretch, or when we had to begin complying, we had the 2015 code with a companion stretch energy code. When they changed and we had to begin complying with their updated 2021 code, that includes a lot of the energy code pieces that we had in the previous stretch code, correct?
Not necessarily. July of last year is when we adopted the stretch code, which is the 2021 unamended, which is basically what everybody's on now.
Yep.
There's a few amendments that's a little bit different, but what we were on from July 1 last year till April 7th is basically what the rest of the state is on now.
Perfect.
April 7th is now we're more, now we're 15% better for residential and commercial, or 10% if you just do electric.
And so to say it simply, the rest of the state has caught up to the standards we were already following.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nick, how many res check applications have you seen
Like, since we adopted this, or like in my life?
for building permits in the last year?
Last year, I think when I did the report for July 1 till April, I think we got 10. And I think 2 comm checks. And now we've received 1 that's passed, and the other ones are kind of in limbo because they're trying to meet it, but they're waiting to see what the council does.
Okay. And of those 10 that you got, would you say that the homeowners submitted that, or was there a design professional that submitted that?
It was probably a very small percentage was the homeowners. It was usually probably a contractor or like an insulation company,
Right.
or you'd have like a design, like an architect or an engineer. The commercial ones are done by the engineers.
Right. Okay. And you said since April 7th, you've only seen 1 because the others are, the other building permit applications are holding off pending this decision?
Yes. We've seen 1 that's met 15%.
Great. It's good data. Thank you.
Are they holding off because of the extra, why are they holding off? Can you explain?
Because they want to know if it's going to be repealed. That way they can just go back to the, and the one that did pass will, if it does get repealed, will not do what the 15% from what I got of it.
Is that because of the cost or the effort, or why is that?
The cost, and I believe she sent an email to the board of the added cost for that permit, for that one, but yes.
Any other questions for Nick? All right, well, with that, we'll close the public hearing.
One at a time.
It's the whole agenda.
Nope, sorry.
So we're going to start with the first be it ordained, which again is to update the code references. So that changes the date you see from 2015 and 2021 and a few other changes as well to get us up to the current state code. Councillor Egan, will you read the first be it ordained?
Be it ordained that proposed amendments to Chapter 11 Building Code Ordinance to update code references to the recently adopted state codes be adopted.
Second.
Any discussion on this item?
Yes. So this is the first step,
Yeah.
which we have to either adopt or choose not to.
Right. This is kind of what we've been kind of loosely calling sort of the administrative step of updating to current code. That's your approach.
There, one of the documents that we have that shows what we're voting on, piece of it?
Yes, so you're voting on,
Right.
so you are voting right now on Section 1, the amendment in Section 1, A, B, C, and D. And in Section F, you are voting on the update from the 2016 to the 2019 and the 2016 to the 2019 ventilation, air quality, low-rise residential. You are not voting on 90.1 2016 energy standard for buildings except for low residential.
It looks like it's not helpful if you're colorblind, but there's.
I'm sorry.
Oh, and also, yep.
This. So there are 2 versions of this. One in Section E remains. So that's the one you're voting on right now, where the stretch energy code remains.
Striking out the last sentence of F.
Yep, and striking out the last piece. The next one that you vote on is the second link. Yep.
Okay.
I'm still not sure I understand.
Yep. So the one that was just read, that one is just to update the code reference. So basically, nothing to. That with the stretch code right now, because we're just voting to update as it stands. So updating those dates, updating the code references, and then with the second be it ordained that you see underneath the first one under 75.-25, that is specifically in reference to whether we repeal the stretch code or keep the stretch code.
So in your agenda, there are linked documents. voting on this one is the linked document for the first be it ordained that was just read.
And it was the one on top in the packet.
Yeah.
I think just for additional clarity, this is bringing us into compliance with what state law now already mandates us to do by changing these references. It's essentially what Nick has already had to be enforcing all along since April. It's just that we have not caught up with those administrative pieces yet.
And I think, I know Councilor Lawrence had kind of commented on this was just sort of housekeeping. Does that sound about?
Yeah.
Okay. So again, this one is not whether we repeal or keep stretch code. This one is the housekeeping vote. Did we have a second, correct?
Yes, I second it.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So for the second one, this is where, I'll read it in. Be it ordained that proposed amendments to Chapter 11 Building Code Ordinance to repeal the optional stretch energy code be adopted.
Second.
So to explain that, this is a vote to repeal the stretch code. So a vote yes repeals, and a vote no keeps stretch code. Any discussion on this one? Councilor Pilch. Oh, Councilor Brown, go ahead.
This has been a learning experience for me, and I guess I'm at this point persuaded that it's not my job when safety's not involved to tell people what to do. So I'm changing my vote to be in alignment with that sort of thinking. A person can always rise to whatever occasion they want to build at the level they want. I think the future will prove to be what I said earlier, which is larger houses can be sacrificed somewhat to go for, to build at a higher standard, which will serve someone later, but it's not my position that I should be forcing people to do that. And I thank Councilor Pillsbury for helping me get to this point. So anyway.
Don't blame me. No, I think one point I do want to make is that I think it's our job to continue to push for what our community wants and needs, but I think we have to be mindful of the moment that we're in and the constraints that our decisions put on our community. And I'm all for keeping a forward look as to what we can do to make sure people have safe and reliable and efficient homes within this community, because there's inherent value there. There's value toward our climate goals. There's value to individual savings. But we have to be, again, mindful of where we are in the moment. And I think that we've heard from our community members, and I think that it's the time to rely on the code that the state has, and keep an eye on what our next step is and when that timing is correct.
And I think just kind of following up on that too, I think what gives me sort of confidence in my vote is that we can do this anytime. We can revisit this. This isn't the end of the decision. We can talk about this next year or the year before, once we kind of see how our current initiatives with trying to get more housing downtown will play out as the code stands for the state.
I wanted to add to what you and Councilor Pillsbury said. I think that stretch codes are a great idea. I don't think they're a great idea right now. I'm doing my thing.
Yeah, Tom, he's on. I see that.
Tom's yelling at me with flashing lights here. How about that? So I think the timing is not right. We've had the previous stretch code in effect only for 11 months. So I feel like our buildings are getting better. In my mind, this isn't a debate around are we building good buildings or bad buildings. It's are we building better buildings or are we mandating even better buildings? And I feel like there will be a point in the future where we will decide that our buildings need to be even better than they are. I don't think we're there just yet, so I'm going to stay consistent and vote to repeal the stretch codes. But for now.
Do you have anything else to add?
I was, but.
Oh, no, I was going to.
I will keep it brief. Because I'm also changing my vote, I just want to say with some explanation about why. I think when Nick first brought this to us, it seemed very clear to me that this is what we needed to do, was adopt the new code that essentially brought us up to where the stretch code had already brought us. And then I was persuaded by a number of people before the first time this actually came before us, including the folks at the public hearing who really made the case for continuing with the stretch code. And I think after a lot of further conversations, a lot more public input, a lot of conversation by the council, while I still agree that it's in everyone's best interest to put as much insulation into their home as possible, there's a hierarchy of need. And just like it's really great if you can be saving for retirement, you should be doing that. But if you are, your first need is to put food on the table today. And I think if we're trying to get people into housing, we need to try to be consistent in our rules about how we're trying to bring housing to Freeport, not make that harder. And I'm also convinced by my intention when I came onto council, which was to do everything I could to maintain the economic diversity in Freeport. And I think keeping the stretch code at this point is really a barrier to that. And that's why I'm voting to repeal it.
Well said. I also just want to take a moment to thank council, because I think this was a very challenging discussion for many of us, and I saw all of you really weigh facts and feelings and figure out what felt right over the last couple, at least month and a half. So I just want to recognize that, and I think that is why this council is so effective and great. So. Okay, so a reminder. So if you vote yes, that is to repeal. No is to keep. So all in favor? Aye. All right. That is 6-0. Also, thank you, Nick, for continuing to walk us through this. I appreciate it. Sweating. All right, item 76-25. This is to consider action relative to setting a public hearing on July 15th. And this is to regarding text amendments to Chapter 21 Freeport Zoning Ordinance Campgrounds. We have Town Planner Kyle up to introduce this.
Hey, everyone. So yeah, this is to set the public hearing. So just to give a brief overview, this draft zoning amendment went to the planning board for discussion and public hearing. Already, the planning board has recommended it move forward to town council as they found it consistent with the current comprehensive plan. So just to give a little background as to why we got here. So our campground performance standards, which you can find in our zoning ordinance, section 505. It's a really brief section in the ordinance. It's really just got 4 standards to it. But one thing that's come up at our project review board meetings in the past, a few years maybe, with some of our existing campgrounds in town, when they've come forward for site plan amendments, is this idea around how to determine density within their campgrounds and what they have to show on site plans. And the confusion was in the language with how it was worded, where it talks about each campsite, whether it's RV, tent, shelters, needing 5,000 square feet of land. And there is some kind of unclarity about whether that should be using a net calculation, where they're just taking total land area of the parcel and dividing it by the number of campsites, or if the board was viewing it more along the lines of wanting to see actual lines drawn around each tent site or RV site showing, okay, this, campsite number 1 has 5,000 square feet of its own land. So there's this kind of confusion around that. So ultimately, we took it to the planning board just to clarify one way or the other which way we wanted to go. The planning board landed on a net calculation for a few reasons. One, it allows for more of a clustered approach. So when we're talking about a lot of the campgrounds being in more rural areas, it's important to kind of limit infrastructure and the need for roadways to, you want, ideally, just like with housing developments, you want to keep things on as little infrastructure as possible for efficiency. So we landed on the net calculation, and that's how the draft amendment is worded. Along with that, the state also has rules, their licensing rules around campgrounds. So our existing requirement is that you need 5,000 square feet for each campsite, 5,000 square feet of land. But the state actually is at 1,000 square feet, and it's 5,000 square feet only if you're within a shoreland area. So that's 250 feet of water or something like that. So the planning board, after a little bit of discussion, ultimately landed on being okay lowering our amount of land needed per campsite down to that 1,000 square feet unless you're in those shoreland areas. So that's what the draft amendment reflects. I think that kind of goes along with a lot of our existing comp plan language recommendations around protecting natural areas and promoting more flexibility for business owners and property owners and things like that. And then the only other change to the ordinance that kind of came up through this discussion was around 505C, which is the screening requirement for campgrounds. So the way it was worded currently is pretty vague. It just refers to this idea of screening shall be required when necessary if there's a non-compatible use, but it doesn't really expand on that much. So we just clarified that typically with these, this comes up if the campground abuts a neighboring single-family home or something like that. So that's typically what we see. And to cross-reference this to our existing screening and buffering standards in the zoning ordinance so that there's some actual direction for the project review board to, if they do want to require screening, it'll point to our existing screening standards, not just kind of leave it open for, whatever the board might think is a good screening mechanism. So yeah, that's pretty much a change. Happy to answer any questions though.
I have a question. Sorry if I missed this, but if you're clustering camp spots, couldn't you just add more? So I understand sort of like clustering them to, save the need for infrastructure
They still need the 5,000 square feet total
Okay.
each.
Okay.
So, yeah, this change could potentially allow for more campsites than before because we're lowering the amount of, or we would be lowering the amount of land needed per campsite. But that doesn't necessarily mean someone has to go that far. I think talking to a few of the existing, or in hearing from a few of the existing campground owners, they probably wouldn't go that far. But on a smaller lot where it could allow for, one or two extra sites, and that might help make the project more feasible, it seemed like a good option. It's kind of like when we talk about housing and minimum lot sizes, right? Just because you make a minimum lot size a lower number doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's going to take advantage of that. Maybe some people want larger lot sizes, for their own personal use, but it at least gives the option. But using the net calculation, at the very least, with whatever amount of density is allowed, it will allow people to choose that clustered layout if they want to, and they aren't obligated to spread out further than they have to.
That's what you can.
Kyle, was during the planning board process and deliberations, were current Freeport campground owners involved? Did they get a chance to submit some input on this, or was there any dialogue with them?
We did have one campground owner show up to the public hearing who weighed in and was generally okay with this. And I think they were one of the situations where increasing the amount of campsites allowed would have helped make their project a little easier. So yeah, I haven't heard any negative feedback from any campground owners.
Great. That's a great example of why we have a planning board, is to go through these things and have a deliberative process and look at the extenuating circumstances, have a public hearing. It's great. Thank you. Thanks to the planning board.
Any other questions?
Just a quick question, and this may be more complicated than it's worth, but if you have a lot that has multiple uses on it, is there a reason why this would impact one way or another somebody's ability to do other things on the lot if they were able to cluster campsites towards one corner, and that would, or in terms of the total square footage that's needed for any use,
yep,
that still has to add up to the total of the lot, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and I don't think we're going to run into too many situations where, I mean, campgrounds for the most part are in a rural district, and then the rural district doesn't allow too many other uses aside from residential and things like campgrounds. And, you know, so you're not going to find too many instances where you have a bunch of commercial uses on a site along with a campground. And a lot of times, like, you know, some amenities that a campground have might just fall under that campground use anyway as like an accessory use to the campground. So.
Okay, so this is, any other questions for Kyle? Thank you. So this is to, thank you. Thank you. This is to set the public hearing. So Councillor Pillsbury, could you please read the be it ordered?
Sure. Be it ordered that a public hearing be set for July 15th, 2025 in Town Council Chamber beginning at 6 p.m. to allow the public to provide comment regarding text amendments to Chapter 21 Freeport Zoning Ordinance Campgrounds related to the
Sorry. Go ahead. Pause.
related to the maximum number of allowed recreational vehicle tent or shelter sites and screening standards. Now go.
Second.
All right, any other discussion on this item? All right, all in favor? Aye. Okay, great. Moving on to item 7-25, this is to consider action relative to a utility easement for subsurface stormwater infrastructure on 30 Moore Street. This is also to Kyle for introduction.
Thanks. So this one's pretty quick. So 30 Moore Street, I forget the exact date, shortly before I got to Freeport, though. This went to the Project Review Board for approval for a mixed-use building on this lot on Moore Street. It's I think, one dwelling unit and an office space. So the Project Review Board approved it as part of their stormwater management plan. They needed to connect a storm drain into the right-of-way. I think this was reviewed by Public Works Director and the town engineer at the time, and was generally accepted as being okay. The Project Review Board approved it, but there was a condition of approval that the applicant have this utility easement for the storm drain to be located in the right-of-way. So that's why we're here.
Any questions for Kyle? All right. So Councillor Pilch, can you please read the be it ordered?
Be it ordered that the town manager be authorized to execute an agreement with Christian Stevens and Amanda Gale in which the town of Freeport grants a permanent utility easement which allows for private subsurface stormwater infrastructure associated with 30 Moore Street, also described as Book 39095, page 296 in the Cumberland County Registry of Deeds, to be placed and maintained in the municipal right-of-way.
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. No, there's like no vote or anything. Okay. All right, now we move into voting. The most exciting part, that's what Sophie says, of the agenda, where we're talking about our budget and voting on our FY26 budget. We have some long be it orders in here, so I'm going to propose that we read up until the end of the be it ordered, and we do not have to read the long lists that follow every single one. So,
If people just say as listed in the agenda or as presented in the agenda at the end of the be it ordered paragraph.
we should be good. All right, so this is to consider action relative to the acceptance of state funds for fiscal year 2026. Jessica, I have you as introduction.
Yes, so, the next few articles are just your standard budget articles, accepting state revenues and adopting the budget for Winslow Park and the general fund for the town, as well as the capital plan. So unless there are questions, it's just a matter of going through the articles.
Great. All right, so for item 7A-25, Councillor Brown, could you please read the be it ordered? Again, you don't have to read the list. You can just say as listed in the agenda.
Be it ordered that the following categories of state funds be accepted for fiscal year 2026, with a list of 7 items to follow as listed in the agenda.
Second.
All right, any discussion on this one? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, item 79-25, this is to consider action relative to the budget as it pertains to Winslow Park. Councillor Smith.
Be it ordered that a total operating budget of $472,665 be approved for Winslow Park, with $465 of these funds allocated to Winslow Park, and $34,200 for Harb Cottage operations for the period July 1st, 2025 to June 30th, 2026.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, this one is to consider action relative to the adoption of the fiscal year 2026 municipal operating budget for the town of Freeport. I will read this one. Be it ordered that the following appropriations be made to the departments for the purposes named, that the following revenue estimates be adopted, and that the following amounts be raised by taxation. Said action for the fiscal year July 1st, 2025 to June 30th, 2026 municipal budget as listed below in the agenda.
Second.
I don't want to belabor the point, but I do want to put on the record that our quick read and vote is a product of dozens and dozens of hours of deliberation, and that's countless hours beforehand of work by Jessica and Sophie and other town staff and department heads. It's special meetings, it's months of effort. We've gone through this, and now it is just the portion where we officially vote. But we don't just get these numbers in front of us and say yes or no. It's not as easy as we make it look. So I just felt like it was important to say. Good point.
And I think that's also an opportunity to thank Jessica for making this year very smooth and very informative. So here we are with no remaining questions. Councilor Egan.
I'd also like to just point out when we're doing communications about our budget, since we have a communications person, that we highlight that while the budget is $17,205,903, that the amount that we are raising through taxation is nearly 50% of that. So that the townspeople know that while we're spending a lot of effort, as Matt just pointed out, to go through each of the line items, that we're also really focusing on ways to bring revenue into the community and not just passing it on to property tax bills. So if there's a way for us to highlight the amount raised by taxation along with the budget amount, I think that goes a long way in explaining the good work that our finance team does here to bring in non-tax revenue to help offset that budget.
I just want to chime in with what I think is sort of maybe the voice of a typical resident. So last meeting, I think it was, we had a couple who came to speak about, here's how much my property taxes have gone up year over year over year, and they expressed some concern, especially with the last couple of years being above average increases. I looked at the span of time that they had shared with us, and over the span of time, I think we're on par with inflation, more or less. Town has grown, we have better services, and our budgets have gone up, no doubt. I feel like the last couple of years with the bigger increases have been a little bit of playing catch-up, because we had a lot of years of being flat or very small increases because of COVID and other reasons. So I'm sort of projecting a little bit out, if I have the privilege of sitting here again next year, that I wouldn't be as comfortable with another large year of increases next year, whether it's me or other people voting on it. I think we're back to, okay, we've got caught up. Now we've got to maybe pump the brakes a little bit and go back to our reputation of being a very, very thrifty town and operating on a shoestring. These are things I've heard, which I take as a compliment rather than an insult. So anyway, that's sort of my projection for the future. So I'm fully in support of this. There's nothing in here that I didn't approve of. I think it's a hard pill to swallow, but it's a necessary one. I think it's the right thing to do. I think it's a good budget.
I would just echo what Dan said. I think I would anticipate continuing to receive feedback from residents, taxpayers, when they receive their tax bill based on this budget, as I did last year. I do think it is certainly a defensible budget, and I take Councillor Pillsbury's point that there's a balance as well in terms of making sure that we are providing the services that retain the property values, that also support the taxation to provide those services, and also acknowledge that there is an enormous amount of work by town staff that is represented in this budget to keep our town safe and running, and generating some of those other revenues that Councillor Egan was talking about in terms of other economic development opportunities. I also know, as we've talked about, that this is a very small portion of the tax bill that people pay, that the largest percentage of their taxes goes to RSU 5, which again is also part of why the property taxes or property values are as high as they are right now in Freeport, because Freeport has an excellent school system, and the residents pay for that, but it's reflected in the property values. So I think this is always more difficult than it looks, but I'm really happy with the process that we've gone through, and I would echo the thanks to Jessica and her team for helping us do that.
And I think this is a good time to sort of plug the new infographic that is on the website that we asked for, where the average tax bill is broken down for a $425,000 house. You can actually download it and put in your own house value in. So I think that's a good tool for folks to have for education on their taxes. All right, any other discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, moving on to item 81-25. This is relative to the adoption of the fiscal year 2026 capital budget for the town of Freeport. Councillor Egan, it is back to you.
Be it ordered that the following appropriations be made for the capital items, projects listed below in the agenda as presented this evening, and that the fiscal year 2026 capital budget totaling $2,418,000 be adopted.
Second.
So this is actually the first portion of the budget we discussed back in early spring. Any?
Counselor Egan, do you want to go ahead and do the be it further ordered?
All right, and go to
Usually
the
do that
next
as one
page,
vote.
right.
Oh, I didn't see that either.
And be it further ordered that the following amounts be appropriated from reserve funds to provide for the items approved above totaling $2,418,000. And be it further ordered that the following appropriations be made for the items and projects listed below as presented in the agenda this evening, and that the destination Freeport Tax Increment Finance District and Concord Gully Brook Tax Increment Finance District for FY 2026 also be adopted and presented below, totaling $440,000.
I'll second that. Any questions, thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just make another comment that, and I'm particularly responding to your comment, Dan, about our reputation of running on a shoestring. I wouldn't want to live in a town that has public safety running on a shoestring, or public works living on a shoestring, or an education budget that is on a shoestring. I think that's important for people to understand. I'm as sensitive to anybody's comments about the property taxes. Most of those are a reflection of values, but I think our town is extremely well run. I've been doing this for a long time, and I've yet to find anything that I found even remotely egregious in terms of what the town is spending money on. There's an enormous drill-down focus from all of the departments that we provide top-level service and information to our residents, and particularly on public safety and public works. I just want to say thank you.
All those in favor? Aye.
Thank you.
Hope you sleep well tonight, Jessica.
Busy day tomorrow.
Great job this year. Thank you. All right, moving on to item 82-25. This is to consider action relative to accepting Maine Public Safety Emergency Services Stabilization Grant Funds. And we have Chief Bernard. Take it away.
Good evening. This is Deputy Chief Vachon's project that he spearheaded. So he applied for a grant with the state of Maine for EMS sustainability. We were awarded that grant in the amount of $33,267.86. We sent out an RFP to basically do an assessment of the department. With that being said, the RFP came back for Froman Consulting Services, LLC, and Paul will come in basically and do a complete data assessment of the department, operational data analysis, demographic and financial analysis, stakeholder engagement and feedback, and data analysis, which is he's going to look at the quantitative analysis, qualitative, and then a comprehensive analysis of that data. He is going to basically talk to everyone within the department, folks outside of the department, and look at basically doing a full analysis of the fire department, fire rescue, to see essentially how our operation is working currently. He'll put that into a report form for us when that is complete, and present it to Sophie when that is done.
So I just want to follow up a little bit. I worked with Deputy Chief Vachon on this project a little bit. Before you is the question of accepting the funds. We'll be back in touch with you because I think there's some negotiation to do with Dr. Froman. We had talked about, and you had authorized the scope of work before. We scored 6 in a grant that awarded the top 5. This was another opportunity to try to get those needs met. I will say that there were 2 companies that applied. This one is the one that we think best meets the council's needs because he is going to look regionally, not just at Freeport. Was part of the conversation that that we had before with council about this particular one. Tonight, all we're looking for is for you to accept the money so that we can bring that in and reseed it.
Is there a match to the grant?
No. However, the scope of work was a $42,000 scope. So at this point, we have to either rescope the work a little bit or come up with operational funds to match that grant. And it's early in the budget year because Jessica's cut us off for this year. So we're probably going to try to massage the scope to bring it in at 33.
Could you talk a little bit, I think this is great, but can you talk a little bit about the plan after you get the report? What would be the plan of either implementing recommendations or considering improvements?
So once we get a report, Chief and I, leadership, will go through that report, kind of take that against the budget that we currently have, the staffing that we currently have, make a presentation, and bring it back to town council. You have previously asked for this information, and what we're saying is we do not have the bandwidth to do that ourselves. We need some help, given everything else that the chief and I are currently doing. So we'll get the information, we'll go through it with the consultant, make sure we understand it, and then either with him or without him, depending on how much it costs, we would look to bring that back to town council with some recommendations for short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals.
Thank you. All right.
Right, Chief?
Yep, good.
Did I read the be it ordered yet?
No.
Okay. I think we're on.
Yes, you did, I think.
We haven't voted yet.
I didn't read the be ordered.
It isn't ready yet.
Okay. Councillor Pillsbury, take it away.
Be it ordered that the Maine Public Safety Emergency Services Stabilization Grant funds totaling $33,267.86 to be used for consulting services related to the Fire Rescue Department evaluation and strategic planning focused on ensuring sustainable provision of emergency medical services.
Second.
Welcome, Councillor Lawrence. All right, any questions or discussion?
Can you just go over the whole thing again?
Well, we're going to start the agenda over again. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, moving on to item A3-25. This is discussing guidelines for the town council's budgeted community support funds. We discussed this at the Finance Committee, so I have Finance Committee Chair Pillsbury on this one.
This will be real quick. The Finance Committee was tasked with looking at the portion of budget allocation that we give to support community efforts. In years past, it's been part of the budget discussion. It's been line items within the budget. We spent a lot of time deliberating amounts and agencies, and it seemed like we just needed a better process. So the thinking was that we would allocate a certain amount of money within the budget, and that wouldn't slow us down in terms of approving the budget. But then we needed a mechanism for how we would disperse those funds. So we came up with a plan that talks about, you've got it in your packets, it talks about eligibility criteria, the application period, the requirements, the submission process, how the review and evaluation will go, and how we'll finally make a decision and then notify recipients, and then what their reporting requirements will be. So in a nutshell, the Finance Committee is going to handle the process of sort of solicitation and then receipt of proposals. There's a scoring or an evaluation set of criteria, and any agency can respond, and they'll be sort of ranked based on their responses and the services that they provide to Freeport and their impact. And we'll go through that process and then make recommendations back to the council as to the disbursement of the pool of funds. So that's it at a very high level. Happy to answer any questions, talk through additional details if there are questions after reading this.
Is there a cap on how much funds go into this account? Or how did you come up with what that number is? Or did you? Was that not discussed?
No, well, that was part of the budgeted amount that we've carried in years past is what we've carried forward. I guess if we were going to alter the amount, we would have to do it through the budget process. So we've missed that boat for this year, so we're set with the amount that was Jessica had allocated.
And it sits in the town council budget, our department.
Okay. And is there a cap on how much somebody can get out of it, or is it just so one group could come in and say and get all of it, or?
Well, we've set, so I think the timeline too is worth pointing out. So all applications must be received or postmarked no later than August 31st. So that way we get everything at once. And so if we have a lot of response, we can kind of choose the amounts based on what we have available and who's applied.
Okay, so these don't get dispersed until after August 1st?
Yeah, and so, go ahead,
Okay.
Matt.
Oh.
I thought you were talking, sorry. The Finance Committee will present recommendations to council at the second regular meeting in October. We talked about this timeline, and it felt important to have the same council that sets the budget also have final say on the disbursement of these funds. And then an invoice will be required by December 31st to Jessica. So again, this is all, everything should be happening pretty
quickly.
Uniformly, yeah.
But to your point, I mean, an agency could make a compelling ask, and the recommendation back to the council could very well be, this is what the Finance Committee thinks, but then it's a vote up here.
Mm-hmm.
So you could say, no, I don't agree with that.
Okay, and if all the funds aren't dispersed?
So just like any other budget item, Chip, if we have $57,250 allocated to community support in the FY26 budget, if the council voted to expend $50,000, $7,250, assuming that no other budget lines were overspent, would then go to fund the capital budget. That's the way we're set up.
Great. And you can see sort of our review, our scoring criteria. We didn't weight it. That felt like we didn't need to do that. But our evaluation for submissions on the back.
Okay. And can it be used for disaster recovery? If we had some kind of an incident that we weren't planning on this, you know, for instance, like when we had the issue with our police department hanging out at the hotels because of all the extra services that were needed because of Portland putting people into our hotels up there. Can we use those funds for that?
So,
I'm just saying something that's unexpected, that's kind of a disaster that we need.
So these live in the town council's budget. They're not an operational expense like an audit or things that staff just pays for you. These clearly sit here waiting for council to make a decision. When council makes policy, council can revise policy. The other thing I would say is within your budget, we have some contingency to help pay for those things, but also decisions that this is happening over here and we're going to not spend money over here so that we can cover that cost. Or Jessica would not be happy with me right now, but council can always vote to reallocate appropriated funds across departments if that's what needs to happen. So you're not giving up any of your authorities with this. It's simply a guiding tool so that the community and staff and the Finance Committee know how to support the decision-making process.
Sort of in response to, as we know, last year, how this kind of became a focus point of the budget discussion. And this is a way to sort of streamline and create a process to make sure we are being thoughtful in these decisions.
And I think at the end of the day, though, it's targeted funds to support efforts within our community that are not directly funded by the town, and that the town and residents see an incredible value back from. So I think that's the spirit of it, but again, this will be the first year we launch this, the way we're approaching this, so it's up for interpretation and feedback and change should we need it.
So it's fair to say it's the starting document, it's a working document, it's going to be adjusted.
I think this is certainly iterative, and it's kind of like with the senior tax program. We see how it goes, and then we can adjust it if we need to. So. Sure. Yep. Quickly.
Hi, excuse me, Chalmers Hardenberg, 11 Somerset. I think this is terrific, and just what you all said, it makes it much more organized than it was last year. I just have one very picky note. In 2A, it says the organizations must be a registered nonprofit or civic organization. One pick is, what does registered mean? And the other is do you have to be a registered civic organization, or should there be a comma after the word nonprofit?
Yeah, I think, I appreciate it. I think the spirit stands, and I think, it's basically trying to get at, it's not Joe Schmo. It's not Joanna Benoit coming in and saying, I want $5,000 for my butterfly garden.
It can be an organization that might not be a registered nonprofit. It may be a civic organization. That can apply.
That isn't perhaps recognized by the IRS as a 501c3, but is still a group of citizens who have some initiative that they are working on.
All right. So I think, Councillor Lawrence, could you please read the be it ordered? It's item 83-25.
Sure. Be it ordered that the allocation guidelines for the town council's community support funds be adopted.
Second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, great. Okay, moving on to item 84-25. This is to consider action relative to leasing a portion of town-owned property located at 3 South Freeport Road, also known as Dunning Boatyard, to a private entity. Councillor Smith, I have you as introducing this item.
So this will be familiar, I believe, to all of you. Municipal Facilities has shared a few updates in the last month or so about the fact that we were pursuing this renewed lease with Falls Point Marine. You will recall that we had some significant changes to the lease agreement last year, due in large part to a new survey of this lot and the significant reduction in what we felt we could legally lease that was not within the state's DOT right-of-way. We have pursued this renewal essentially as basically what was agreed to last year. So recognizing that the space is more constrained than it had been, that there are some limitations on what the tenant is able to do operationally within that space. I will remind you that Municipal Facilities did receive a request as specified in the lease for some additional temporary storage, which we granted over the winter, which allowed the tenant to stage some materials that had been fabricated and were waiting to go out once the spring arrived. And really the issue that is, I would say, of most concern to municipal facilities at this time is required maintenance to the building, which there has been significant deferred maintenance. And Sophie can share more if needed about conversations related to our insurance company and what they would like to see in terms of inspections and maintenance related to the building. But otherwise, in general, this is, for the most part, the same as the lease that you all saw last year.
Councilor Pillsbury.
Thanks for going through all the work getting this ready. I know it's been a complicated sorting everything out. Is the per month lease rate market competitive based on the limitations that you mentioned?
This per month lease rate went through significant negotiation last year. And when I look at the curtailment of space and storage and the condition of the facility right now, I think for the next year, it is fair to kind of hover where we are. Yeah, I guess I'd leave it there.
And then to that point, do we feel like at some point the facility will have to be taken off the market in order to figure out what's next and or do necessary long-term repairs? And how are we planning for that? I mean, because we're going to have someone lease for a year, but I think going into it, I think it would be helpful to know our constraints and our intentions. Has that been communicated?
I think Carter is aware of kind of the position that we're in right now, which is that we have a plan to have town staff and our code officer go through the building. We need to present a plan to the insurance company for how we're going to address the deferred maintenance issues. So the Municipal Facilities Committee has asked that we bring back kind of the list of things that need to be repaired, the priority for those repairs, and an estimate for the budget for the cost of those repairs. I think when we have all of that, which I'm hoping we'll have coming up, probably not for their July meeting, but probably for their August, if they meet in August, that will give us an opportunity to kind of, the council, well, the committee and then the council to really look at what the cost of owning that building is. And it will also give the current tenant plenty of notice as to the invasiveness of the repairs, if the council has concerns with affecting those repairs, any other conversations that council wants to have about the building should happen this fall, which should give him more opportunity to understand and then be able to sit down and talk about lease, or if we can't, if the building is a tear down, which I'm not saying it is, but if it was, that would give him notice of that.
Great. Yeah, I think it's just fair to approach it that way, so thank you.
Do we have any specific amount set aside for repairs, or is this all be money we would need to find in some future budget?
There is some money in the Dunning Boatyard reserve account. I don't have it off the top of my head. I want to say it's in the $150,000 range. I think we really need to have Nick go through. I think we have electrical concerns. I think there might be a structural concern or two. So I think we want to look at that and be able to bring it back so council can have a discussion based on the facts.
Another concern about that is, given the fact that the rent did go down significantly proportional to how far the leased premises were reduced last year. One of the concerns that we talked about at municipal facilities was trying to determine whether it was even possible for any entity to lease this space and for the town to even recoup the cost that will be required to maintain it, not just in terms of necessary significant repairs now, but going forward. And I think that's a continuing concern. But because we don't yet have that plan and we don't know how much that's going to cost, we felt that it was important to continue with the lease and continue with the current use while we sort that out.
Great. Any other questions?
I think so.
Yes.
Yeah. Be it ordered that the town manager be authorized to execute an agreement on behalf of the town of Freeport with Falls Point Marine Incorporated to lease a portion of town-owned property located at 3 South Freeport Road for a one-year period beginning July 1st, 2025, on terms substantially similar to those presented to the town council on June 24th, 2025.
Second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
I had an updated version, so I don't know what happened.
That's okay. All right, moving on to public comment period number 2. This is for folks who are online who wish to speak, but I don't think.
We don't have any.
All right.
Unless Jim wants to speak, but he doesn't tend to.
All right.
Oh, yeah.
Hold on, we're just reviewing the tabled item quickly.
This is not the
Okay.
updated one.
I think we have a little bit of confusion. I don't think we have the updated,
So can we leave it on the table?
yeah, the updated appointment
Can we leave the-
policy. So we'll leave it on the table until the next meeting. We're just gonna leave it.
You just leave it on the table.
We're just leaving it. Just want to make sure we all know that we're skipping it, and we will have the updated one for the next council meeting. Okay, so that gets us to other business.
Can I introduce the people that are here?
So this is for initial discussion regarding the impacts of paid off-street parking in VC1 and VC2 zoning districts. Sophie, you wanted to introduce?
So I just want to introduce, not necessarily the topic, but the staff people first here to help you with the topic. We have Caroline Pelletier, or as my car likes to call her, Caroline Pelletier, who is our resident parking expert. So if you have questions about our parking, she's a good person to go to. But the other person, you've seen him on the flat screen, but it's Ben McCall, and he is the town attorney from Drummond Woodsum. He works closely with Amy, and one of the things that, just for folks who might be following our details, we normally work with Amy Chow. However, Drummond Woodsum works as a team, and so we've been working more with her to kind of lighten some of the load on her plate and work with her colleagues, who I have been assured are not associates, but rather fully capable town attorneys. So we have been working behind the scenes with Ben to better understand the question of the impacts of paid parking. So as counselors are aware, we received notification from the Freeport Historical Society that they have signed a lease agreement for paid parking for approximately 30 spaces in the old Main Street lot. That has brought out questions. I've fielded several phone calls. And so I think it's important that the town council kind of understand. I passed out earlier today kind of a framework for this discussion, because the town is party to an easement on the old Main Street parking lot. Ben will be here to talk with us in executive session about our rights and responsibilities surrounding that. So specifics about the parking lot, the old Main Street parking lot, and the lease should not be part of our conversation right now. This conversation is more about the question that has come up, which is there are folks in the community that have expressed some concern about the lack of language in the ordinance that regulates paid off-street parking, and which brings the question, if the council feels like that's intentional and you don't care. I wouldn't use the word care, you care about everything, but you feel like the ordinance is adequate, or if you have concerns about parking spaces, parking lots, shifting from free parking lots to parking lots that charge the public to park. And then the question of, if that is something that concerns you, do you want to talk about prohibiting those changes before, while you work through a process of considering ordinance language? So this is not about one thing. This one thing triggered a focus on this topic. But as an example, so the ordinance right now, and Ben, you can save me anytime you'd like. The ordinance prohibits shared parking from being paid, people who have shared parking for charging for that parking. That is the only reference to paid parking. So when we look at that, right now we have a 500 space parking garage that is currently under a credit enhancement agreement, that as part of that credit enhancement agreement is required to stay free to the public. Would council be fine if suddenly that was a pay to play or pay to park facility? Would council be fine if another entity that had a fully private lot in the middle of the village commercial 1 and 2 zone changed it to you have to pay to park? I have had some conversations with LL Bean about this and some other community members, and I think there are thoughts kind of around the gamut that might be something that you might want to consider. This discussion is a purely council discussion. We're here to kind of support that discussion. But, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
I just want to state publicly that, of course, while Freeport Historical Society is mentioned in the document before you, and I am the executive director of the Freeport Historical Society, when I'm sitting here, I'm representing the residents of District 2, and I'm not representing Freeport Historical Society. Because this is a larger policy discussion, my intention is to participate in parts 1 and 2, because it would not be appropriate for me in my other role to be a party to confidential communication with the town's attorney. I will not be part of the executive session. I will also say that should there be questions related to the Historical Society, because I was under the impression this was, before today, that this was all going to be an executive session, someone could be available at the podium to answer those questions, but I would not be answering them from the dais.
And I just want to be very clear. We asked those questions, and Ben gave us some good answers, which is why I tried to outline the conversation that the attorneys are advising us that having you have discussion about a general policy is wholly appropriate. The other two elements would be more of your private hat. I also want to make it really clear that the discussion about whether council wants to engage in consideration of ordinance amendments or moratorium is not about the Freeport Historical Society's notice. Their notice made us evaluate where we were on the face of the earth and what the implications of paid parking, off-street parking might be. And we really feel like council needed to, you're at a point where you can elect to do nothing and let the market do what it wants to do, or step in and consider making changes that could in some or all fashions prohibit paid parking off-street in the VC1 and VC2. Those are the two districts that staff has kind of identified as being kind of most appropriate. Doesn't mean you can't decide something else. And then the question, if you think you really want to engage in that conversation, then the question is whether or not you want staff to begin working on a moratorium ordinance to bring to you so that you don't get more people making those decisions to go to, or get people to try to get under the wire if they think you're making change, and put in applications that then create a grandfathered status that, oh, I said something wrong. He's coming. No.
I just don't think it's fair for me to be lurking in the background. Again, I'm Ben McCall from Drummond Woodsum, one of the town attorneys. I think Sophie did a very good job, and I'm not correcting anything that was said, but I just want to make the agenda item and the discussion a little more concrete for the council. So, as Sophie said, over the last couple of days, perhaps about the last week, we've had a number of discussions on this topic internally among staff, and simply want the council to be aware of what the state of play is within your zoning ordinance as it applies to this concept. And the conclusion that we've reached is that on the whole, and I don't want to speak overly broadly, but as a general concept outside of a shared parking arrangement, you do not in Freeport have any express prohibition on an off-street parking lot being managed by UPP or a similar company charging a fee for someone to park there, regardless of where they're going in town. That's a policy choice that's wholly within the council's prerogative. And so it's perfectly appropriate for the council to look at that and say, well, we aren't concerned about that. We perhaps are concerned, but want to see it play out further before we decide to do something. Or perhaps you would like to look at a couple of policy options. None of those have been crafted yet, to be fair. But there are a number of examples in communities across the state of how these types of things are regulated. They can be regulated from a zoning perspective. They can be regulated from a licensing perspective, whereby the use isn't prohibited, but there are some checks put in place on companies that operate those types of facilities. There's a whole host of things to be done, but what we didn't want to have happen was for the council to continue hearing feedback from the public and be under the misimpression that this was something that there was a prohibition on. I will say that, of course, as with any other land use, staff evaluate proposals for particular properties on a case-by-case basis. And so depending on the property, depending on what level of review it has received in the past, be it site plan review from the project review board or only staff level review, and depending on what the proposal for paid parking looks like in terms of what the build out of the site will be and what equipment is being used, all of those factors change the analysis about what level of review, if any, is required at a staff level before that can be approved. And so perhaps this is a conversation that could go on for a very long time. I think what would be helpful from the perspective of us as the town attorneys, and I would, without speaking for Caroline and Sophie, but for staff, we don't need a mandate necessarily from this discussion, but if the council is interested or concerned or pick another a motion, I suppose, this would be the opportunity for this problem or issue, however you'd like to phrase it, to begin to be addressed. But by the same token, if this is not something that the council feels is a priority to act on at this point, that's perfectly appropriate as well. So I am happy to discuss those generalities more as the council would want, and then, of course, other specifics at a different time.
Sophie, I know Brett's here, maybe he's got the number. We had some inventory checks and counts of parking spaces and uses. I have the number 1,800 something as the surplus count. Am I off on that?
Yeah, I think it's closer to
1,100, okay. Wishful thinking. 1,100 surplus parking spaces based on some assumptions and some generalities about need and visitors, et cetera, but 1,100 in an area that, you know, you get up 2 stories, you can see one end to the other. It's not that big. So I'm and perhaps part of the reason for that, at least in my experience, and I've been following this for quite a long time, we had, and it's past tense now, significant amounts of parking regulation and an entire kind of almost below ground economy of parking and who owned the lots and who shared them and where, and the exchange of fees, and it was quite elaborate. And
yes.
And it led to, I'm making a giant assumption here, 1,100 surplus parking spaces as one of the results, but it absolutely resulted in that in our absolute core downtown, immediately adjacent to the economic drivers in our community and the transportation nodes and our main artery of vehicle transportation, that a flat, unmetered, unpaid-for parking space was the highest and best use of that land, which is really bad for the sustainability of our community, in my opinion. So I'm just trying to make a point that while we're reacting to a change here or a proposal, it seems that I just want to point out the factor that happened previously, which is we were all nervous collectively, the community was nervous about increased demand of parking, and we weren't making any more of it. And so the value of that parking went way up to the point where landowners were making more money off of parking than any other use, which is on an unpaid space that the general public just comes and thinks, look at all this free parking. And it was not free. So I'm highly interested to learn more about what the proposals and other opinions are, but it seems like we have a really long way to go with market dynamics before we sort of react to a change in how someone is going to monitor their parking.
So I want to be really, I'm trying to walk a kind of a tightrope here, because I do not want council to think that I am trying to drive you in one direction or another.
I don't think that.
Because I 100% believe that it is council's choice. I think when you start talking about details like that, I think there is a counterpoint. I think that this argument has a point and a counterpoint as you follow things down. When you talk about our additional parking spaces, our surplus, one of the things we were talking about with that is now beginning to take those parking lots and develop them into housing. The other piece I will just share with you, and it's not just one other business that that has called me with concern. They are talking about, they haven't showed me data, they say they have the data, that moving to paid parking diminishes foot traffic, paid off-street parking diminishes foot traffic. So my concern in not bringing this up is, and this is where Ben's going to jump up really fast, is that when somebody goes through a process and they receive an approval for something, or it didn't require an approval, they now have a property interest in that activity. So let's just say you choose to pass on this now, and you have two private property owners come in with and change to paid parking, and then we say, oh no, this has got a negative impact, we should go through the discussion. You kind of own them at this point. Oh, see, he's going to get up and correct me.
I think that's right. I think the council needs to understand the chronology of this. And perhaps, to Councilor Egan's point, this is something where at this point in time, the problem isn't pronounced, or perhaps it's not considered a problem. And that is truly a policy choice for the council to consider. But the counterpoint to that is, and this is just a general land use law principle. Many of you may be familiar with the concept of a legally existing non-conforming use. Colloquially, they've been called grandfathered uses in the past. The general principle of that is that if you, as a property owner, are using your property in a manner that is consistent with existing ordinances, and then ordinances change to prohibit something or to change something that affects your property directly, you generally get to keep, subject to many caveats, but you generally get to keep doing what you have been doing, because when you started doing that activity or built that structure in a location that was closer to a setback than is now allowed, it was a legal thing that you had done. And so, by way of using this example, what has been identified, I think, correctly in your zoning ordinance is that, generally speaking, although some examples would require, say, town planner review or review by the project review board for a change in use of a particular piece of property from something to a parking lot, for instance. Parking lots, as you probably know, are allowed uses subject to site plan review from project review board in the VC1 and the VC2, for instance. There's no prohibition or no performance standards that say X percent of those parking spaces need to be free and open to the public, or anything along those lines. And so, arguably, at this point in time, if a property owner were to convert, strictly from a zoning and land use perspective, if they were to convert use of part of their existing parking lot to a paid scheme, and I use scheme not in a pejorative sense, a paid setup, arrangement, lease, what have you, that, absent a performance standard in your ordinance that controls that is something that is perfectly permissible, assuming, of course, that other permissions and permits that were required as part of that conversion and that project were completed as well. So it's an overused analogy, but you want to make sure that the horse is not out of the barn before the council considers it a problem. Perhaps that is something that you're okay with. And again, I like Sophie, I want to be clear that this is not putting a finger on any scale. It's simply brought up because town staff reached out to us after hearing these concerns and wanted an analysis of both whether there was something that presently could control this potential change, and if not, what those options were. And so that's what we're here to offer.
So I spend an inordinate amount of time thinking about parking in Freeport from a lot of different perspectives. One related to housing. I mean, I started thinking about parking in Freeport 40 years ago when my house was moved from District 1 to District 2 to make room for a parking lot. But I think that our system of shared parking and the way, as Councilor Egan was speaking, what that did was create a system in Freeport where we encouraged visitors to come and park their car once and then walk everywhere, which I think has been essential to a large part of the success of Freeport. And along with the village layout, kept people from being in more of the strip mall mentality where I'm on this side of Route 1 and I have to park here and then I've got to get back in my car and I've got to drive to the other side of Route 1. And I think there is a lot of benefit to that. I also think, as Councilor Regan said, that there has been some cost to that in terms of how much parking those parking requirements in the past have created. And I'm thinking back to Jeff Speck's presentation last Tuesday, where he referred to another planner's work on the high cost of free parking. And I know Sophie sort of qualified or clarified his interpretation of that meant on-street parking, not off-street parking, and the benefits of paid on-street parking. I think part of the reality that he was also naming is we have almost no on-street parking, at least on Main Street. We have quite a bit on Grove Street and Depot Street, but very limited on Main Street. And we don't have a lot of feeder streets, which he was also talking about how you can tier that. But he did suggest that really where parking should be free are the less desirable places like parking decks, which we only have one of. I think, as both Sophie and John have said, as we try to reduce just how many parking surface lots we have, one of the things that came up in the downtown vision plan was the proposal of building another deck or parking garage in order to try to consolidate parking in the same way that we're trying to have higher density housing, of having higher density parking instead of it spread out all over town. My concern about how we get to that point is I don't know who would build a parking garage, who couldn't.
The town would.
Well, that's the question. I mean, that was the proposal in the downtown vision, was that the town would pay for it. And my concern has been, will the town, is that something the town wants to pursue through TIF funds or some other way, and we think we can keep that free? Because what I've long feared is that I don't think you can recoup the cost of a parking garage and keep the parking free. So that's, and also the fact that I think it's highly unlikely that LL Bean is ever going to charge their customers to come and park in their many lots directly around it. So I go back to the other piece that Jeff Speck mentioned, which is his real push in a lot of communities of all kinds of sizes, including our size or even smaller, is to do away with parking requirements altogether and to let the market sort it out, which means that, I think to your point, John, you get out of forcing people to provide parking that may not actually be needed, but for them to determine what is the most convenient for their customers and what are the amenities or their residents for housing buildings. And I think that's the other piece that I think is probably going to be a part of this conversation eventually.
So I know I personally keep thinking about my own personal situation, which thinking about Councillor Brown said earlier, that's not my job right now, but I think my personal situation is probably the situation of many people in town, where I live technically walking distance to downtown, but it's not safe to walk. So if I want to go to downtown, I have to drive. And I know we're really working on that to build that infrastructure to make it so people in the community can bike and walk and find other ways besides drive to downtown, not just visitors, but people who actually live here, making it a place for residents. But we're not quite there yet. So I think my concern is, I don't know if I think the solution is we create some sort of mandate that is paid parking isn't allowed. But I think I'd be remiss if we didn't do our homework and learn more. Because, I would love to walk to town, but sometimes I don't feel like risking my life. And so I probably won't go to downtown as much if I have to pay for parking. So I think that's just my pitch to not let this go, but perhaps maybe do a little bit of homework and some information finding.
I have a question following on from what John had said, that if the highest and best use of land is an unmetered parking spot, then maybe we're not doing something right, setting the conditions for development in our town. Are we also concerned that if some of the excess parking goes away, if there's more pressure, if there's more demand for parking, and paid parking proliferates, then the highest and best use of land will continue to be parking, because now I'm getting revenue for my parking spot. So there's even more pressure to keep it as a parking lot and not develop it. I don't know if the economics work that way.
The landowners are getting paid now by the businesses who are required to provide.
Than they used to.
Well, they are getting paid less, but they're getting paid.
So those are shared, oh, no, it's not necessarily shared, right? Never mind.
Right, but would they get paid more if it was a paid parking spot?
Yeah.
Like if they get, I'll make up some numbers, $50, $75 per spot per month.
Sure.
Now,
Yeah.
would they get 200?
I don't know.
I don't know the details, but.
It would be interesting to know, the Catholic Church did what the Historical Society is planning to do last year. Maybe it's been 2 years now. So I'd be curious to know how that's gone. I happen to know some adjacent residents there who laugh at the, you could play pickleball in that parking lot on a really nice Saturday when there's virtually no parking because nobody's going to pay when there's all the free parking. So I don't know if that's something you're studying, Eric. But that's, to me, that was a sort of the bellwether flag to see if this is going to work. And apparently it is. They're continuing on to do it. But by appearances, it doesn't look like it's all that robust because the scale is still way out of balance.
But I think if I was a parking operator, paid parking operator, I would need to have a loss leader and say, I'm going to start with some parking lots that I know are not going to make me money yet, but at some point I'll cross the threshold when it's not 90% free parking, and who's going to pay to park in that 10% of the parking lot? Because why would you when there's all this free parking around? But sooner or later, it's 80% of the parking spots are paid, and I'm going to have to pay somewhere, but in order to get to the 80%, I need to kind of buy up or lease up the lots. So I get why they did it, even though it doesn't make any sense right now. And I guess that's sort of the discussion that I'm curious about. I don't have an answer tonight, but do we do nothing? That feels a little wrong to me. I was glad to hear Ben suggest that there's a land use option, but there's also a licensing option, because part of my concern is not, do we do paid, do we allow paid or not, but if we do allow paid, continue to allow paid, under what conditions? Because one of the things that I'm really concerned about is the experience that visitors have when they come to Freeport, which creates the demand for the parking and the stores and the economy that we have of the town. So if we destroy that, then we have other problems. So maintaining that demand. If I come to Freeport as a visitor and my car gets booted, or if I come to Freeport as a visitor and I have to pay $50 to park, these are extreme examples, but these are things I think would deter visitation to Freeport. So can we say you can allow paid parking, but there's a limit to how much you can charge? There's a limit to how you enforce it. There are special considerations for residents. There are certain zones we do it. So I have a lot of questions.
So I don't want to get red belled.
Yelled at.
Yeah. As I understand, or at least what I'm looking for, I want council to have whatever conversation council wants to have tonight. But the question for me really isn't what are all the options, because I think if we go through that, engage that process, that's when we put Ben to work and work with Caroline and Code and Brett to come up with, here's your spectrum of options. Do you want to narrow in on that? One of the things that concerns me is going through that process is going to take 6 months is crazy to think that we would have a conversation with the community and be able to get through that process in only 6 months. If I were a business that, say, had an expiring credit enhancement agreement and 500 parking spaces and a desire to make the property more viable, profitable, and I knew that we were looking to begin to develop parking lots, I would be thinking, now is the time for me to get this application in, or make this change, or sign this lease effective when my credit enhancement agreement expires. So I'm just a little, that's why I will tell you that if you want to have, the only part I'm going to advocate or make a recommendation on is if you think you're going to engage in a process that will result in any kind of regulation or limitation on the scheme, and I use that also not in a negative way, of paid parking, I think a moratorium does make some sense. If you don't, or you think, you know what, if those 500 spaces go or this private lot goes, there'll be plenty of other ones to fill in the gap, then I think let's have a conversation and give us some direction on what you'd like to see and the timing you'd like to see that.
I personally think this is coming because of what we're doing downtown. I don't think we're there yet. I think we should have a plan for when it does happen in the time before it becomes a problem, because when it is a problem, that's no time to be making big decisions like this. So I love the market idea, but we also have, we'd have to get rid of all the parking requirements we have now to let everyone do, which I don't know how the commercial world would like that, or the retail stores would like that, because they're not, now they wouldn't be paying to hold parking spots. I was always kind of against that anyway, but it wasn't what we were doing. So I do think it's coming. I think we should talk about it now. The other thing we got to think about it right now is we're Freeport. We're competing against Kittery. They don't have a lot of meters down in Kittery, right? And you show up and you can do whatever. So it's like, well, you know what? Let's just stop at Kittery instead of bypass Freeport, quaint little town. But that's really who we're competing against.
I also just want to mention that I think simply having this conversation is raising the alarm publicly, right? So I just want to echo what you were saying it's, if I were a business that was like, oh my gosh, I have to react now, well, how will that impact what we see for the next couple of months? So it has to be a risk we either take or we decide to do something about.
I mean, my take on it is that I don't know what the right answer is, and I've heard compelling thoughts, but what I've overwhelmingly heard is questions and a sense of, geez, we don't know what the impacts could be and about any decision that we take. And I think that in light of that, my sense is that you collect more data, you engage in a process, and you try to figure out the impacts. Like, it's, in the best of times, that's how you would approach it, but I think we need to be very sensitive around the fact that we had a great presentation earlier tonight and talked about how our vacancy rate for businesses was at the lowest level it's been in 10 plus years. Making the wrong decision here can throw that all out of whack. We've got a downtown vision plan and push to get more housing and revitalization. The wrong decision here throws that all out of whack. And so I don't want to make a short or rash decision, but I also want to be very sensitive to the potential impacts here. And we've worked really hard over the last X number of years getting to a place, and this feels like it's something that could just pop up and derail a lot of this if we don't approach it the right way and have thoughtful dialogue and a clear understanding of the pros and cons of any decision we're going to make. And I feel like that really concerns me because this has kind of come out of left field for me, and I don't want everything that we're working toward to be just thrown off balance by something like this. And my initial thought in hearing the discussion tonight is that, yeah, we definitely need a very thoughtful approach to this. And in the interim, I think we need a moratorium on action so that we're not reacting to something that has just caught us off guard. We're the ones driving what the solution may or may not look like. That's my take on it.
I'd also be curious to see how far we go down the rabbit hole of parking. I think it sounds like it's not just paid parking, yes or no. It's how we handle parking in Freeport in totality.
So, Ben, can you just talk a little bit, because there are some boundaries around moratoriums, and could you talk just a little bit about what they mean and what it would mean, like, on the face of the earth for people?
So, a couple of things. A moratorium is, it's a specific type of ordinance under Maine law. It is, I think, best understood as a pause button. We don't have a draft, but a potential draft, the way that these types of things are typically dealt with, I'll use the example of large-scale solar. I think that's a classic example over the last couple of years. A municipality will become aware of property owners talking to solar developers, and they had never thought of the issue before, but all of a sudden it comes to the fore, and there is a moment where the town council or the select board wants to consider decisions. And so a moratorium ordinance in this instance would need to define effectively what the problem, and I put that in quotation marks, is. What is the issue that you feel, and this is a requirement under Maine law, is not adequately addressed by your existing ordinances? And I think this certainly would qualify based on what we have looked at. It is not a topic that is generally discussed in your zoning ordinance or in your streets and parking ordinance. It would prohibit the establishment or the starting of what you define the use to be. So if it is paid parking, depending on how it is defined, it would prohibit and be subject to enforcement action like any other land use enforcement, a property owner starting that operation. And it would also, I think this is the more important part of the two, it would also prohibit town staff from issuing any permits related to that type of activity. And so essentially it would be a pause button. By law, it starts as a 6-month pause button. It can be extended by votes of the council for additional periods of 6 months, provided, and the caveat to that is that you need legally to demonstrate that in the 6-month time frame that you have hit a pause button, that the town is making sufficient progress, and that's all in the eye of the beholder, but sufficient progress in addressing that issue. It could very well be, as a number of councilors have mentioned, that after looking at the issue for 6 months, the council, with help and keeping in mind that because these are land use ordinance changes, the planning board or the project review board would be involved. Perhaps you decide that this is an issue that you're glad that you've studied, but you don't feel that any further action is necessary at that point. The moratorium would expire in 6 months, and everybody could continue to do exactly as they had planned to do. Or perhaps you use that as an opportunity to regulate or prohibit or somewhere in between this type of use. And if it also comes to pass that that presents the opportunity for parking as a whole to be better addressed in Freeport, then that is great as well. I will say, of course, the moratorium is not going to, although I would not recommend that the moratorium prohibit the new permitting of any parking in any way, shape, or form. I think that's overly broad, and I think that leads to the argument that that's not a proper use of the moratorium power. You need to be addressing something specific that's not already accounted for. But there's no prohibition that the council use this as an opportunity to study the issue as a whole and use that as a vehicle to both look at the paid parking issue and also other related issues as they come. So procedurally, I think what's important to keep in mind is that this is an ordinance that, of course, would need approval by the council through your normal rules of procedure. There is the question, and I'm happy to, this is a huge topic of discussion, moratoria can be retroactive. They can be retroactive to the date that the council first discussed the issue, which is tonight. You're having a quite open discussion about this possibility, and so this is not a requirement of a moratorium, but if you chose to, you could make the effective date would be the date that is enacted, but the retroactive applicability date would be the date that you had first discussed it. That also, just to keep in mind, that would also mean that the expiration date would be 6 months from tonight, not 6 months from the enactment date. We can certainly give you a full rundown of exactly what that procedure would look like if that's something that you want to look at your next meeting. That's what we're here to do.
So I don't know yet where I'd land on a moratorium. I'm leaning in that direction and for a lot of reasons that everyone's talked about. What gives me pause is last Tuesday, we were at a meeting where we got everybody we could in town to come out and hear the most famous guy we could find to talk about the fact that there's a high cost of free parking. And really what you should do is add paid parking on your streets. And really what you should do is not have parking requirements. And then a week later, the headlines are going to say, Freeport bans free parking in town. And the length of our deliberation is far longer than the newspaper will print. So that's what people are going to see. They're not going to see all of these reasons that we're talking about. Not a reason to not do something, but that's the impression we're going to give off. And we've had a lot of discussion around our reputation for, are we a development-friendly community? And what message are we sending by doing that?
I think that's why I kind of mentioned, I definitely hear that and appreciate that. And that's why I mentioned sort of, if we pull the thread of paid parking, I think it's going to unravel a whole lot to do with parking. And I think I look at that as an opportunity, because I think seems like an imperfect system to say that lightly. So I think it can be, I'm not going to say what the headline should be, but I think it's an opportunity to say we're taking this seriously, we're looking at it because we know it's been a chronic issue, and right now is the time to address it.
So, I'm just going to reiterate what I need, which is I need an understanding from council, not a decision, but a direction. Like let's not do the silver bullets. Let's the direction being, do you want me to begin to build out the spectrum of options that you have and begin to work on, with Brett and Caroline and Ben, kind of what the options in front of the council, and begin to build time at ordinance committee or subgroup or however council wants to do it, workshop for the full council of here's the issue, let's talk about what your questions are, how do we get those questions answered. So that's the first one, because if you're not interested at all, we've got lots to do. The second question is if you want to do that. So if you don't want to do that, it makes the question of moratorium moot. But if you want to do that, do you want us to, for the next meeting, not necessarily not July 1st, but probably the 15th, come back with a draft or send to the ordinance committee the question of the moratorium ordinance? Because I can't draft that, even as talented as I am. We will we would be engaging an attorney and spending some money on that.
And just to be clear, if you draft it, it doesn't mean we have to accept it.
No,
We
it
could
just-
draft it as an option, and then we can still have the conversation.
So I would look at it as drafting it, having some guidance from you, whether it comes back to the full council or through the ordinance committee, having that process play out with discussion, debate, revisions, and ultimately, maybe if it goes to the ordinance committee, it comes back with a recommendation not to proceed, or it comes back to the full council for a rigorous discussion as we go to set the public hearing for the ordinance. You know, we do things all the time at the staff level where we start something, we begin to massage it, and then we bring it to you and either get completely different direction or decide it's not a priority. So this isn't any different.
So I feel like to get to a decision, I'll just say my feelings.
Okay.
Is that we pursue sort of the platter of understanding of options. I think I'm sometimes time blind, so check me on this if I'm trying to dedicate us to too much, but I would like to see it come to council. I think this is probably a full council discussion. And I think a drafted moratorium that we can consider.
I mean, does it make sense to have this, as much as I love the idea of having another meeting during the summer, does it make sense to have it as a workshop and have other stakeholders, like I just feel like it's a bigger discussion than us trying to fit in 30 minutes on an agenda and limit it to our discussion. I don't know. I mean, I'm not looking for other stuff to do this summer, but it feels like if we want to move this,
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's an ordinance committee decision because it's just delaying the fact that we need to have it as a whole. I know, as fond as I am as the ordinance committee. And I don't want to do it, even if we were ready to do it next Tuesday, I don't want to do it next Tuesday because I want more time to think and talk and listen. I like Matt's idea about setting aside time to dedicate to the discussion. The draft itself, I imagine, is easy. It's almost not material. Like, we don't care what the language is. We know what we want. We could draft it afterwards. We could draft it before. It doesn't matter. I think it's more important to set aside some time in a month or so to workshop this and invite stakeholders to that discussion.
So if I was to have Chris look at the last week of July, the first week of August, and send out a request for your availability on a few dates that we know we have chamber open, because I'm guessing if you want a workshop, you want to invite people to it, you probably want it at least recorded.
I have a strong preference.
What's your preference?
For the first week of August.
Okay.
Are we done?
All right. So if that works, we'll send that out and start trying to narrow down a workshop day. And we'll work with the team here to kind of bring you, I'm sure, a Gantt chart and some better understanding of the array of options and some more discussion. When we talk about stakeholders, my initial thought would be to reach out through our regular staff connection at LL Bean to see if they'd like to have somebody here, and also through Tani and the chamber to see if we could kind of move it there. Is there another group that you, advertise it for the public, but is there another group you'd like me to specifically reach out to?
Would it be like the building owners, the landlords? Would that be through the chamber or?
I think Brett has a pretty good sense of who they are and how to contact them. I think most of the larger kind of building owners.
If there's a rep for the parking garage.
Wilder?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think we should, for me anyway, I'd like to try and get some residents to show up as well.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to hear how our residents feel about the issue.
Maybe we get all the in-town residents.
I'll just note that I know, John, you were talking about the fact that for a lot of property owners, the highest and best use was parking because of the parking requirements. I think the other thing to note is that, and Caroline can correct me if this is incorrect, but the majority of leased parking spaces, most shared parking is owned by the building owners that have to provide the parking. But most parking leases have either been from the town or from 3 nonprofits downtown. I don't know that there are a lot of private landowners who are leasing parking to other businesses. So if you want to talk about how the parking economy in Freeport has developed over the last 40 years.
I think it's changed significantly in the past 5 to 7 years.
Yeah.
I was making a reference to what it used to be. I would
Yeah.
agree with you now that there's not a lot.
Oh, no,
The
I
highest
just...
and best use is not necessarily a parking space.
Right, but I'm saying during that time period, still, I think the majority of parking spaces that were leased to businesses that required parking were out of lots that were owned by either the town or 3 nonprofits. And so that when we talk about why that became a valuable source of income, you're talking about it mostly for nonprofits or the town, not private landowners. So just in terms of stakeholders, I think that's something that ought to be considered as well.
Do you have any connections to those 3 nonprofits? And could you invite them?
2 of them, yes.
Invite them to the workshop?
That's another good reason why I think we pull the thread of paid parking and we see a lot of other things. Trying to improve the process here. So I want to make sure if there's anybody who doesn't agree that we'll do the workshop and kind of get a better understanding of our options, a drafted moratorium for consideration. If that's not the way you would like to go, I'd like to hear from you. So we have general agreement.
I think the workshop's a good idea. I'm not convinced that a moratorium is the
Yeah.
necessary outcome of that, but
I agree.
yeah.
I
mean,
think,
it can be under consideration, but
I think the intention that I have is making sure we have our options available for the
yeah,
decision we make.
absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So we all agree. With that said, I think we will move on to executive session. Oh, I'm just so excited about executive session. Where am I? Oh, let's see. I'm not sure if it's a good time for Sophie to go to the bathroom. I think this is, with the lead being staff, I think the intention is that this is in my conversations with Sophie, there is some background to be done with code enforcement and planning to determine the regulatory environment around if we need permitting, if there has to be some sort of approval, that side of the process. Yeah, thank you for saving me. Simply put, it's my understanding this is a staff piece that will be reported back to council.
As far as if someone can just do paid parking?
If there needs to be any sort of code
Yeah, so I think
planning approval.
that is really going to depend on case-by-case basis. You know, if somebody's been through site plan approval and they're making modifications to the site, they can need to come back. If we can, we have design review standards. It's really going to depend on each individual property, the history of that property.
Okay.
So yeah, potentially if people wanted to make these changes, approvals from the town. I did not touch the mic, for the record. Did that answer your question?
There's a question for you, if there's any discussion you need for item 2 on the list, the regulatory evaluation.
Oh,
So when I put that together, it was more to say, here's the issue that was brought up. Number one is where council needs to land in open session. Number two is something that staff is going to undertake as it would with any other entity. And number three is what we're going to talk about in executive session. So it was more, I didn't know how much you had heard because my phone was actually ringing off the hook.
I asked Sophie to kind of help me put this in the bucket to understand the scope, so. All right. With that, we can move into executive session. Huh? Yes. I'm getting there. Be ordered that the town council enter into an executive session pursuant to 1 MRS subsection 4056E for consultation with the town attorney regarding the town council's legal rights and responsibilities regarding an easement agreement for the old Main Street parking lot.
Before we vote on that, does Counselor Smith want to recuse before we go into executive session? Because once we're in executive session, nobody will know that you're recused.
Well, I guess I already stated that at the beginning, that I wouldn't be part of the executive session, but I am not attending the executive session.
I'll second that.
Okay. So with Counselor Smith's recusal, all in favor?
Aye.
All right.